Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Trump calls Zelenskyy a dictator after refusing to hold elections, accusing him of doing a terrible job. It's after Zelenskyy responded to Trump's comments that Ukraine could have settled the war with Russia easily and criticized the US president of being trapped in a disinformation bubble. Meanwhile, Trump's special envoy Keith Kellogg arrives in Kyiv to discuss security guarantees as he promises to sit and listen to Ukraine. And Hamas says it will hand over the bodies of 4 hostages on Thursday, including 2 children taken by the group on the 7th of October. To our top story, and Donald Trump has hit out at President Zelenskyy, accusing him of being a dictator without elections. Writing on Truth Social, the president said, modestly successful comedian Volodymyr Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that could not be won, that never had to be started, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. On top of this, Zelenskyy admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections. It's very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left. It comes after Zelenskyy accused Trump of being trapped in a disinformation bubble after Trump suggested Ukraine could have settled the war with Russia easily. We can now go live to Washington to speak to our correspondent, Nick Harper. Nick, good evening to you. These two seem to be aiming daily blows at one another. A dictator, a modestly successful comedian. Trump also implies US money donated to Ukraine has actually gone missing. Some pretty harsh words being used by Trump here.
Yeah, very harsh words, a real litany of criticism here from the US president. And we've seen that, as you said, being ramped up over the course of the last few days. A number of patently false accusations in there, including Zelenskyy being a dictator, despite being elected in what have been seen as free and fair elections, saying that he has done a terrible job, and also pressuring for that peace deal, saying that he better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. That accusation as well, that billions of US dollars of funding have gone missing during the 3 years of conflict. And the problem for Zelenskyy, for European allies and many of Donald Trump's critics, is this feeling that here the US president is quite simply parroting language that we've seen from the Kremlin, propaganda against Ukraine. So significant concerns about this latest social media post from the US president.
Yes, indeed, Nick. Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy, is in Kyiv right now to meet Zelenskyy. That's going to be a bit of an awkward sort of meeting for him, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is tough timing for Keith Kellogg, who is there in the country trying to move things forward, trying to also reassure Ukraine, despite this criticism coming from the White House. And also, it comes off the back of those attacks from the US president, including on Tuesday, those suggestions that negotiations had been possible. Quite simply, at any point during the last 3 years, Donald Trump seemed to be suggesting, saying that even a half-baked negotiator could have solved it. Donald Trump also suggesting that he could have negotiated a peace deal before the war began and been able to do so without the loss of life, without the loss of land. Keith Kellogg's job certainly made much harder by that criticism on Tuesday, but also this latest social media post.
Nick, earlier today, Putin said no one is excluding Ukraine and insists he'll be happy to meet Donald Trump. Are these some positive signals that Ukraine and Europe will be part of future negotiations?
Well, potentially, but I think it's also worth bearing in mind that what we're seeing from European leaders, even from US lawmakers, some within Donald Trump's own party, is that warning that quite simply the Russian president cannot be trusted. And even though we're seeing those warm words, those suggestions that Ukraine will be included, that may not become the case. We're seeing similar language from the US top officials, though. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, both saying that so far this is not a betrayal of Ukraine for excluding them at this point, and also trying to make it clear that those talks that were held between top US and Russian officials in Riyadh was really more about normalizing US-Russia relations, to get them on a good footing before the proper peace negotiations begin. But of course, there has been that worry from Europe and from Kiev that they did not have a seat at the table, that they were not part of even those initial negotiations.
Trump also spoke about his past conversations with President Putin before the invasion of Ukraine. It's easy to understand why critics are accusing him of favouring Russia, and like you mentioned with that Truth Social post, Nick.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think if we look at this in the context of how US relations with Ukraine and Russia have changed over the course of the last month, since Joe Biden left office and since Donald Trump came into office, really, it's been a complete 180. Ukraine was considered an ally. The US was providing funding, support, military equipment to the country, while at the same time keeping Russia at arm's length. There were sanctions in place. It was a real cold shoulder type of arrangement, trying to turn Russia into a pariah nation as a result of its invasion of Ukraine. But what we've seen under Donald Trump is really a switch of those roles. It is now President Zelenskyy who is being kept at arm's length, while Russia quite literally has a seat at the table, with those peace negotiations now having begun between the US and Russia. And that complete change, I think, has worried many of those officials in Europe, but it has fueled critics of Donald Trump who are using his own words, where he has talked very warmly about the Russian leader in the past, saying that he has done a good job, while at the same time saying that the Ukrainian leader has done a terrible job. And there is that concern that Donald Trump, who is known to like strongmen, who is known to like the Russian leader, is now cozying up to him at the expense of Ukraine.
Nick Harper in Washington, thank you so much. Trump's latest Truth Social comments come after President Zelenskyy accused President Trump of being trapped in a disinformation bubble. The Ukrainian leader was responding to Trump's words that Ukraine could have settled the war with Russia very easily. He also dismissed claims about his approval ratings and calls to replace him, claiming Russia was responsible for the spread of misinformation. Here's exactly what he had to say.
We have seen this disinformation. We understand that it comes from Russia. We understand that. And we have evidence that these numbers are being discussed between America and Russia. So unfortunately, President Trump, who we have great respect for as the leader of the American people, whom we respect very much, who supports us constantly.
We can now speak to Ukrainian MP Yevheniia Kravchuk. Yevheniia, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Zelenskyy is clearly Zelenskyy is clearly disappointed by President Trump's comments. And in the last hour, Trump has called him a dictator in this scathing post on Truth Social. Do you think this is more disinformation coming out of the White House? What's your reaction?
Indeed, not just Zelenskyy, but Ukrainian people are a bit surprised with this reaction or these comments coming from the Trump administration and President Trump himself, because, in fact, the approval ratings for President Zelenskyy are on the same level the full-scale invasion, the biggest conflict on European continent now for 3 years, and the war for 11 years in Ukraine. It is quite difficult to understand. To my mind, it might be some sort of trying to influence the, as Trump thinks, the weaker side, Ukraine, which is, a smaller country, less population, and actually a victim in this war of aggression, and that would be easier and faster to end the war. But Ukraine hadn't give in into ultimatums in 2022, in February 2022, and in 2025 we have our own military production. We had 800,000 people in the army. We have a running economy, and it will not give into ultimatums as well. And of course, Ukraine love to have elections. Ukrainian people love to go to elections and elect new people into the government. And actually, if you look on Russia, for 25 years, when Putin was a dictator and a ruler or whatever, on head of Russian state, Ukraine had 6 president change. So 25 years in Russia, just one Putin, not changing, and in Ukraine, 6 president had been changed. And of course, we will hold elections when it will be in normal circumstances, not drones flying around, not missiles flying on our heads, and of course not Russia on our borders wanting to invade a sovereign state.
Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, has actually arrived in Kyiv today. Zelenskyy has suggested Kellogg should ask locals about the war and what they make of Trump's comments. After Trump's comments, this must be a pretty awkward meeting for the two men. How do you think these talks are going?
Well, I've just seen information that General Kellogg had met the head of the office of President Zelenskyy so far, and I think that was a good conversation. So I didn't see any of the official comments after the meeting of actual President Zelenskyy and General Kellogg. But as I know, it's not just a one-day trip, so it will be a few days. And I really hope that General Kellogg will not just spend his time in governmental buildings in Kyiv, but also will speak to people, or maybe will go to the front line and see the men and women fighting on the front and what they think about the ultimatums and unjust peace. I mean, we've been paying with blood for our sovereignty, and we're not just going to give in just so easily.
Zelenskyy announced he was postponing his visit to Saudi Arabia yesterday, claiming he wouldn't give legitimacy to the US-Russia meeting. But I want to ask you, where does this leave Ukraine and Europe at the negotiation table?
Well, first of all, we do have a good response from European leaders, and you might have seen that President Macron had just invited some leaders into Paris, and he's holding another summit with different countries also on the European continent, but also Canada, for example. And we do feel support, and I think that there will be a next package of sanctions from European Union next week to the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale invasion, but also next package in the military aid. And I think Europe is changing and actually understanding that it has to be European countries who will be responsible for the security on the European continent, not just constantly relying on the United States. As you said about the trip, canceled trip, this trip will be held, but in March. So the next date set up will be March 10th. But before that, President Zelenskyy, together with his wife, was in United Arab Emirates and had some very good meetings, and also economical cooperation will to come. But also he held a meeting with the President Erdogan in Turkey. And Turkey is actually a very strong supporter of the sovereignty of Ukraine, saying that internationally recognized borders should be recognized.
Yevheniia Kravchuk, Ukrainian MP, I appreciate your thoughts tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's get the Russian side of things with John S. Kavulich, a senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight. John, good evening to you. We have been discussing Trump's comments that Ukraine could have settled the war with Russia easily. And he has hit out at Zelenskyy, calling him a dictator in this scathing post on Truth Social. The row between the US and Ukraine appears to be deepening.
Very much so. You know, this, for everyone watching this unfold, it's almost like being in the production room of a reality show, where you're watching in real time the characters develop their scripts and then say what they're going to say. And it's important and it's instructive to remember with President Trump that he, during his first term, and somewhat thus far during the month into his second term, he often separated himself from his own government. He would say, I have a great relationship with President Xi of China, but my government is sanctioning them. I have a great relationship with President Kim of North Korea, my government's sanctioning. And with President Putin, he would say, I have a great relationship with President Putin, but it's my government. And during the first Trump administration, no U.S. administration had sanctioned Russia more than the Trump administration. So he tries to separate all of this. And so it's important to remember that, one, he is, very good and very adept at separating himself from what the government does to leave room for conversation. And then what we're seeing with what he's doing vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis the meetings in Saudi Arabia, is everyone, I think, is overanalyzing and talking about, a just and lasting peace. President Trump is not interested in a just and lasting peace. He's interested in a ceasefire. And so that's what his primary goal in interacting with President Putin is. He knows that President Putin is going to do what he wants to do a year from now, 2 years from now, or as long as he's president. And he also realizes that he can't really do much about that. And for President Zelenskyy, that's really tough to swallow, because President Zelenskyy wants something that has permanence, that will live past his term in office. So we have these, competing narratives. And unfortunately for Ukraine, everything is basically going to go the way the United States directs it.
Lavrov has praised Trump for his stance on NATO after Trump accused the previous US government for supporting Ukraine's bid to join the military alliance. Does Russia feel like it's won this particular battle by having Trump and the US supports right now?
Absolutely. The government of the Russian Federation is feeling very confident because President Trump is very, very good at optics, and optics are important to him. The moment, the television moment, the verbal moment. And so for the Russian Federation, what did they get? They got the U.S. Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister Lavrov meeting in Saudi Arabia. Now, as someone who has been looking and a part of what has happened since February 24th of 2022, we had during the Biden administration, we had the G7 meetings, but particularly we had the G20 meetings where Russia remained a partner. And at those G20 meetings, Indonesia, India, in Brazil, we had the U.S. Secretary of State doing everything possible to avoid discussing anything with Lavrov. And now we have the U.S. Secretary of State within the first 30 days of the Trump administration saying, we've got other issues with Russia. Now, for Europe and for Ukraine, they don't look at it that you can pull it all apart. It's Ukraine's a part of everything. But for Trump, he's looking, where can he win in the relationship with Russia? Where can he chalk some things up that people will say, this is the Trump legacy? And so that's why you're seeing what he's doing in a very public way, and now picking the fight, or Zelenskyy picking the fight, because it's important to remember that President Zelenskyy during the last 3 years has insulted just about every head of state and head of government that has provided support to Ukraine, and he continues to do it. With President Trump, that's not really a good idea. And so, you're the Russian Federation. You're feeling really good right now because you haven't really done anything. You haven't stopped bombing. You haven't stopped killing, but you are talking to the President of the United States.
The US has told Europe it needs to spend more on defence. This has been a big thing. Well, as we've been discussing, the EU appears to be sidelined from these peace talks aimed at ending Russia's war in Ukraine. My big question to you is, can Europe really survive without America's support, especially NATO?
It can. It just has to recalibrate. President Trump, when he looks at the European Union, he looks at it as an opportunity to disassemble it. And so Ursula von der Leyen, Dr. von der Leyen, who's the president of the European Commission, in essence, the administrator, she views herself as a head of state, head of government for the 27 member countries. President Trump views her as an administrator. He wants to be dealing with the heads of state and heads of government of the 27 members. And so that makes it very, very difficult because the European Union requires for most issues unanimity. And President Trump knows that. So he just has to pick off one to really cause some issues. And right now he has Hungary, he has Slovakia, and he has some others that are more quiet that really don't want as much attention placed on Ukraine as there is. And the financing, do they have the money? Yes. But just like the United States, President Trump has said, you need to be north of 2%, you need to be 3%, you need to be 4%, you need to be 5%. The United States will not be spending 5% because there are too many other issues, social issues, infrastructure, education, healthcare, that taxpayers want to see. The same goes within Europe. So they're not going to be able to coalesce that kind of money to replace the United States. But can NATO survive with a lessened United States? Absolutely. The challenge with NATO, and this is one of the reasons why President Zelenskyy has never been able to, A, have Ukraine become a member of NATO, and then B, have NATO troops in Ukraine, is because no NATO member wanted to test what is referred to as Article 5. And Article 5 is not a requirement, but it is a component of the agreement that says that an attack on one means that the other members will then determine what they want to do, if they want to do anything, to help that particular member. And so no NATO member wanted to test the fact that if something happened in Ukraine where the Russian armed forces of the Russian Federation hit at NATO, would NATO really want to fight back? So no one wanted to test the proposition. That was bad for President Zelenskyy. And now with the European Union trying to figure out what they're going to do with money and with respect to whether they're going to have a collective defense budget or allow members to spend more. We've got a German election coming up in 4 days. We've got a Polish election coming up in May. We've got other elections throughout the 27 members of the European Union coming along. NATO being pushed to spend more, and then President Trump saying, I want this wrapped up. And for President Zelenskyy, he knows that President Trump is interested in a ceasefire. NATO knows that. The European Union knows that. They're not happy about it because it's what's going to satisfy him short term. But that's basically where we are. And I don't think we're going to move from the focus being on the ceasefire as opposed to a longer term resolution of the Russia-Ukraine issue.
John S. Kavulich, it's been absolutely fascinating to speak to you this evening. Thank you so much for joining me, Senior Editor for Outcome Modelling Analysis at Issue Insight. Thank you once again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A British journalist has gone missing in Brazil, according to the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents. 32-year-old Charlotte Alice Pete worked for Al Jazeera and The Times, told a friend she was in Sao Paulo on the 8th of February but was planning to visit Rio de Janeiro before she did disappear. The ACIE is calling on authorities to step up the search to find her. The rapper A$AP Rocky has been found not guilty of firing a gun at his former friend. A jury in Los Angeles acquitted the musician who denied the charges after a 3-week trial. Fans of the hip-hop performer and his partner, the singer Rihanna, screamed and cried after the verdict. Pope Francis has spent a 5th night in hospital, according to the Vatican. The pontiff has the onset of double pneumonia after being admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on the 14th of February. The infection can inflame and scar both lungs and makes breathing more difficult. And the British tennis player Emma Raducanu has thanked fans for their support after dealing with a man who exhibited fixated behaviour at the Dubai Tennis Championships. According to the WTA, Raducanu was approached by the man in a public area on Monday night and later ejected from the stadium. Writing on Instagram, Raducanu said, "Difficult day yesterday, but I'll be okay and proud of how I came back and competed, despite what happened at the start of the match." To Israel now, and Hamas says they will release the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages on Thursday. The group's negotiator says it will also release 6 living hostages on Saturday, double the number originally planned. In exchange, Israel will free all women and anyone under the age of 19 who has been arrested since last October. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent Giles Gibson, who's been following this story. Giles, good evening to you. Thank you for joining me. This exchange will include the bodies of 2 of the youngest people held by the group. Tell us who they are and what their family have said about the announcement.
Well, Hamas is saying that 3 out of the 4 are Sherry Bibas and her 2 young children who were just 4 and 9 months old when they were kidnapped by Hamas back on the 7th of October 2023. The father of the family, Yardan Bibas, 35 years old, has actually already been released after surviving his time in captivity. What Hamas have been saying for some time now is that Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons were killed in an Israeli airstrike in the first few months of the conflict in Gaza. That is something that has never actually been officially confirmed by the Israeli military or other Israeli authorities. We've also had a statement from the Bibas family reacting to this announcement from Hamas. They're saying that they are understandably really in turmoil and that they are waiting for definitive confirmation. So I think this case really reflecting what we're seeing now, this shift into a different phase of these hostage releases, not just living hostages being returned to their family and the elation associated with that, but also these families who for some time now have thought that their family members could be deceased, now seeing potentially some confirmation of that.
Giles, Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar said negotiations on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire will begin this week. We know they have been delayed. How likely is this to happen?
Well, we do expect them to start in the next few days, but actually, even though official negotiations haven't actually started, we do have both sides kind of putting out their initial bargaining positions out into the public arena. Gideon Saar, the foreign minister, saying that they are very committed to this idea about there not being any sort of continued presence for Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, also saying that he is open to, or the Israeli government would be open to, prolonging the current ceasefire if they get towards the beginning of March when it's supposed to expire and they're close to a deal. We've also had Hamas on the other side of this deal saying that they would be prepared under certain circumstances to release all of the remaining Israeli prisoners in one go, rather than these kind of weekly phased releases that we've seen throughout Phase 1. Just to remind you, under the initial terms of Phase 2, as was agreed at the start, what we would see is all of the Israeli hostages released by Hamas in exchange for all of the Israeli troops inside Gaza completely withdrawing from the enclave.
Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at the top business news. British inflation increased by more than expected to hit a 10-month high of 3% in January and is likely to rise even further. The Office for National Statistics said the increase was driven largely by a smaller than usual drop in airfares and a rise in fuel prices. Analysts say figures could slow the Bank of England's interest rate cuts. KFC's headquarters is being moved from its ancestral home in Kentucky to Texas as part of a wider shake-up at its parent company. Yum Brands says it will shift the office from Louisville to Plano. However, the fast food giant will keep some operations in Kentucky. In recent years, many companies have relocated to Texas due to the state's lower taxes and business-friendly policies. Turning to the sports news now. Tiger Woods, one of golf's most famous players, left his teammates in fits of laughter after a yardage mix-up during a tournament in California. Woods left himself 199 yards to the hole on the 13th after his tee shot. However, a mix-up with his caddy meant he chose a wedge to hit his shot 99 yards. That left him really short. A confused Woods immediately sought out his caddy and then admitted that was one of the most embarrassing moments in his golfing career. And this evening, we'll see the latest installment of a Champions League rivalry between two of the era's leading teams. Real Madrid will face Manchester City in Spain in the second leg of the knockout playoff, which pits the record 15-time champions of Europe against the 2023 winners. Two of Europe's most successful managers, Carlo Ancelotti and Pep Guardiola, will go head-to-head. Now, a reminder of our top stories. Trump calls Zelenskyy a dictator after refusing to hold elections, accusing him of doing a terrible job. As after Zelenskyy responded to Trump's comments that Ukraine could have settled the war with Russia easily and criticized the US president of being trapped in a disinformation bubble. Meanwhile, Trump's special envoy Keith Kellogg arrives in Kyiv to discuss security guarantees as he promises to sit and listen to Ukraine. And Hamas says it will hand over the bodies of 4 hostages on Thursday, including 2 children taken by the group on the 7th of October. That's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Hadley Gamble's interview with Poppy Gustafson, the UK's Minister for State for Investment, is coming up next. Now, that's followed by Riz Khan hosting Keith O'Connell, the former US Director of Space Commerce. And, of course, don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Minister, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya. I want to kick off by just asking you to set the scene for us in terms of the prospects for Saudi investment in the UK.
Yes, of course. My role as Minister for Investment is obviously to do everything that I can to sort of support investment in terms of the UK, but also UK into other nations, whether that's the Kingdom or otherwise. And I think at the moment it's a really exciting time to be thinking about the opportunity that the UK holds. For a start, we've got some of the best sort of academic institutions in the world, some really interesting problems that are being solved around there. Secondly, we're thinking about how we think about the sort of regulatory framework and making sure we have a good, open-minded, pragmatic and stable regulatory framework to support investors in helping driving our initiatives. But most importantly, we've really laid out what it is that the government's trying to accomplish within the UK, within our modern industrial strategy. And in there, we've laid out the sort of key areas that we are looking to sort of develop and drive into the future. What key one for me is thinking about sort of the green energy transition and how we use investment to sort of support our ambitions to be a green energy superpower by 2035.
What about artificial intelligence? Because obviously Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries are going to be spending billions on infrastructure. That's not something that the UK can do given your energy dynamic.
I am so interested in the artificial intelligence side. My background is from the technology sector, so obviously it's an issue that's close to my heart. And I think success around artificial intelligence is twofold. So the first thing is really thinking about the infrastructure, and that's accessibility to data centers, making sure we're provisioning the energy that's needed to keep all of that data safe and secure, the connectivity, making sure that the latency is appropriate, making sure you've got the skills and expertise to create all of that fantastic AI. But the other aspect is how do we encourage adoption of these technologies, and how do we create a culture of innovation where using technology in day-to-day aspects is part of what it is to engage with government. And one of the things that I found really interesting in this particular trip is the appetite within the kingdom for people to use the technology on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that I've really paid attention to and thought, how do we encourage that kind of culture? And I think that's something that the government can really think about in terms of making the sort of technology-enabled services as well. So that's been a really interesting aspect in terms of AI.
Covering the kingdom, you see very often that they're ahead of the curve when it comes to adopting new technologies. And then, to your mind, how easily is that going to be done in the UK, given the fact that you have the highest energy costs, and at the same time, you have an infrastructure that doesn't necessarily enable that, plus regulation? Because the folks that I speak to on a regular basis say the UK is the last place that they want to open a business, and it's simply due to policies.
I categorically disagree, and I would say the counter. I think when you think about the regulation...
How can you disagree? All the millionaires left last year.
But let me touch on...
And they're entrepreneurs, they don't want to do business in the UK.
This is my day-to-day life. I spend my day with these AI entrepreneurs and I see them, and I think about the regulatory framework. We have got, if you think about data privacy, so GDPR, I've got the strongest regulations that make sure we keep our consumers and data safe. But regulation around AI is incredibly pragmatic, which means innovators are able to come in, they're able to use the latest technology, but know that...
But I mean regulations on entrepreneurs specifically, and I'm talking about taxation.
Taxation.
Chasing them out of the country.
We have got the best research and development tax incentives anywhere in the world. The UK R&D tax incentive is world class. And I think that is one of the reasons that we've seen so much of that capability coming out of the UK. We have the best academic institutions in the world. We have got some world-class R&D tax incentives. With regards to entrepreneurs, we've got EIS schemes to make sure those early innovators are rewarded for the risk that they take. The next challenge I think that we're spending a lot of time thinking about is how do we make sure that they get access not just to the seed capital, which we know they do. There's many, many billion-pound companies coming out of the UK. But how do we provide them the scale-up capital to take that to the next level and beyond? And that's the part that I'm really excited about.
So essentially, we saw the Bank of England having your growth forecast for 2025. You're not doing well. What is the plan? Are you going to get Rachel Reeves fired? I mean, what is the next step for this government? Because we've heard a lot of announcements, but they haven't yet delivered.
All departments within the UK government are singularly focused on growth and how we accomplish those growth ambitions. No one is satisfied with the level of economic growth that we've seen over the last decade. And we acknowledge and know that the next decade will require us to make sure we're delivering on that growth. We have set ambitious targets. We've got the industrial strategy where we've been really thoughtful about what are those key sectors that are going to be driving growth. And then we thought about what is the role between that public and private partnership to be able to bring together investment to achieve that. So on the public side, we've got the National Wealth Fund, so thinking about how do we use public money to sort of seed and catalyse those sort of emerging markets, but then how do we work with the private sector to create investment opportunities so that we can coalesce and bring that investment around those key objectives that we've laid out in the industrial strategy.
You're here at a very historic time, the talks between the United States and Russia. There's a lot of concern in Europe that those folks aren't at the table. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has said that we're going to have to spend a heck of a lot more on defence. Where is that money going to come from?
I think this is why this sort of key aspiration around growth is such an important situation. We had the budget that came out last year, and that raised a lot of money for the government to be able to invest in those key sectors, whether that's the healthcare or in terms of increasing defence spend or indeed education. But more is yet to be done, which is why sort of really helping to support the government on its growth agenda is my role as the Minister for Investment, and one I feel very passionate about.
So you coming from the private sector, you understand the need to show results. When are we going to see results from this government?
I also know that coming from the private sector, these things are very, very difficult to predict. But I think it's about how do we translate this overwhelming desire and will to see growth, and how do we translate that into execution? We're already starting to see that in terms of thinking about the regulation, making sure they're aligned with growth. But then it's also the pragmatic day-to-day frustrations that get in the way that the government is really trying to clear out. In my role as the Minister for Investment, people are talking about things like access to the grid. They're worried about sort of planning regulations and getting planning approvals through. And that's why the government has made sure that we are introducing more planners, clearing the way to allow that investment to come in rather than having to go through long, timely delays that not only cost you in terms of timescales, but also in terms of money, because that money is sat dormant, unable to sort of execute and unable to support the growth. So I think we're really helping to make sure that we clear away those barriers.
And finally, when you think about how you're going to invite investors into the UK, how do you deal with the pushback on the non-dom regulation? Because they say, why would I go?
I think it's not what I see. So every day within
That's what I hear from many people I speak to, investors, people who used to live in the UK and who got out immediately when this legislation came in.
And I think understanding their reasons and the tax implications is something that the Chancellor is listening to, but ultimately innovation will be fostered by having the best academic institutions in the world, people out there solving those real problems, and then sourcing that investment behind that. I would love to see many, many, many more people that have generated that wealth coming into the UK and supporting that.
Minister, thank you for joining us.
It's been a real pleasure.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Six decades after Star Trek's Captain James T. Kirk began his mission to boldly go where no man has gone before, US President Donald Trump has vowed to make the science fiction character's pledge a reality. Well, critics of such a mission to Mars have called it an expensive vanity project with no return on investment. But for others, the announcement of such astral ambition within an inauguration address has inspired a new era of excitement about space exploration. And it's an exciting time for the global space economy overall, as SpaceX and Blue Origins lead a growing private sector pursuit of orbital opportunities. Up to 100 countries now have some form of space program, with India and Japan and countries in Africa and the Middle East joining the established space nations in Western Europe, Russia, China, and the US. The upside is unlimited. Beyond space tourism and the mining of asteroids for valuable minerals, there's the prospect of new jobs, new skills, and entirely new industries developing. But there are challenges too. What will be the impact of AI? How should we regulate space so it doesn't become a wild west of competing companies and countries? And how can we ensure the space race doesn't develop into Star Wars? Well, my guest on this episode was Donald Trump's Director of Space Commerce during his first presidency. He was awarded the Vice President's Dedicated Service Award for his support to the National Space Council and has been given a Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in space commerce. As CEO of Space Economy Rising, he advises key players on all aspects of the global space economy. And I'm delighted to say that Kevin O'Connell joins me now in the studio. Kevin, I'm really glad you could join us. There's a lot to talk about. Now, I have to start by asking you, what do we actually mean when we say the global space economy? Is it about rockets, satellite, space tourism, or is there more to it than that?
So it's much more than that, actually, Riz, and thanks for having me today. Really, when you talk about the global space economy, it's really anything that is involved in exploring, leveraging resources, understanding what is going on in space, and frankly, how it affects things on Earth. The canonical way to think about this is to see the rocket blasting off the pad, and that's absolutely necessary. But the phrase I like to use on the space economy is that it's really accelerating and diversifying. And so we can look at traditional market segments like communications, like navigation, sensing, and those are all changing at lightning speed. We can talk more about that. But we also have newer market segments that are coming into the market, like space medicine, space food, and even lunar regolith and things that are going to happen in what will become the lunar economy.
We definitely have to touch on some of those. But, you know, as a layman, space exploration sounds a lot sexier than space commerce. As an expression, does it need to be rebranded?
I think they're both. I think they're both sexy. Actually, I'm excited about the economic aspects of space. That's one of the things that I've paid a lot of attention to in my career. I remember writing about remote sensing markets in the late 90s and getting a lot of hate mail that said, this is only about governments. This is not about, well, that's still a market. But, and so I think the economic aspects are important, really because we're benefiting in so many ways here on Earth. I mean, one of the challenges we have in the space business is that most people don't know that when they go to their cell phone, half the applications on their cell phone really are somehow plugged into space, the precise timing signal, communications, other things like that. And so the extent to which we're leveraging space 10, 20, 30 more times a day is really incredible. We have to have people understand that they're benefiting in that way. The exploration piece is critically important for human understanding and understanding what's going on in the universe. But so I think they're equally sexy in that context.
Yeah. I guess it's because I'm really that kind of the Star Trek and Star Wars fan, and it's all about that part of it, whereas really you're on the practical side. I mean, you yourself say you're not a typical space guy.
Right. I mean, I really have focused mostly on economics, sometimes to really shock a space audience. I'll say I was not a Star Trek fan or a Star Wars fan as a kid, and that really gets a groan out of the audience. But I've really always thought about it in terms of the benefits that we create, not only from understanding what's going on deeper into the universe, but also how we're able to leverage that to improve our lives here on Earth.
Well, in 2019, there was a report that said that 60% of life on Earth is dependent now on space technology. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's probably much more than that today, as it turns out. When we're talking about the numbers, what we're really talking about here globally is a roughly $600 billion economy. That includes everything that NASA's doing, that the UAE Space Agency is doing, that others are doing, but also the commercial activities. And the statistics that most people don't know is that roughly 80% of what is going on globally is actually considered commercial. Now, we could spend a lot of time defining that. I don't think we need to for this purpose. In terms of estimates, we think that this is headed toward about a $1.8 trillion market. This is the World Economic Forum's number, by about 2035. I have to be candid. I'm always skeptical of those numbers only because I think we're undercounting, because of the difficulty of counting how much we're actually using space per day. I'm also an optimist, and so when I see those numbers, I think we're actually using space a lot more than we can typically account for. It's analytically a challenging thing to do.
So you're saying it's at around 600 billion now, but that's probably not a fully reflective figure.
That would be my view, yes.
But I know when I listen to you, do podcasts and do interviews, you talk about space as that trillion-dollar economy.
Absolutely. And over the years, the estimates have gone between, say, 1.8 is the current World Economic Forum number, and some years back there was as much as a $3 trillion estimate by 2030. And so we're going to be somewhere in there. When you think of it, though, if you were just to grow aggressively between now and 2030, you'd get very close to those numbers. So that's really a relatively conservative number. I don't think we're accounting for a number of the developments, these other verticals. We're not counting for the possibility of Starship becoming, if you will, the railroad, the high frontier, all sorts of other things that would actually accelerate those numbers. And the numbers are not so important as diving down into every one of the verticals that are the things that are the real meat and potatoes of what's happening.
I want to ask you about Starship a little bit later. It's fascinating. But you talk about investments having shifted in terms of space commerce, from risk investment to value investment. What does that mean?
So let's talk overall about space investment. Governments are still important in investing in space, essentially in setting strategy, complying with the Outer Space Treaty and the governance issues. And so let's not dismiss governance. The trend that has really changed this explosively over the last few years has been the arrival of private capital into the market. And so the extent to which we had very robust private capital in 2018, 2019, 2020, in 21 we have a record high globally of private investment in space. Then the world changes. We have a war in Ukraine. We have a whole series of other things. The global macroeconomic condition changes. And so space investment on the private side plummets. And so right now, where I'm optimistic is the private investment community is ready to come back in right now.
Those figures for 2021, because I heard you talk about that, it was like 47 billion in 2021.
There was 42 billion in 21, and then it dropped to single digits in 22 and 23. And I think we're seeing an uptick now in early through 24 and now in 25 as well. I've been spending a lot of time at investor conferences and talking to people who really think they understand now what makes a better space company. In some ways, it's really, it's a company. And so we like to think of space companies as being special in many ways, and they certainly are. But at the end of the day, they have to have customers. They have to make assumptions about their pipelines. They have to make assumptions about their technology and the regulations and things like that. And so in some ways, we now understand what makes a good space company as opposed to people that just have some interesting ideas.
Generally, though, Kevin, which sectors in terms of space investment are the most interesting ones for people now?
Well, so I think there are people that are very interested in the traditional ones, again, sensing and navigation. We're looking for new ways to do navigation. We're looking to exploit a lot of the sense data that we're collecting. I've been focused on that particular market segment for about 30 years. And one always hears about the demise of satellite remote sensing. And what entrepreneurs have done is simply change to new technologies, change to new phenomenologies, different kinds of sensing modes. And now, of course, I'm sure we'll get to it, the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence to that story. So, I don't like to pick any one area. I think there's some other areas like space sustainability that we should spend a couple of minutes on as well. How are we going to make sure that we're able to create similar innovations in space in the next 6 decades than the ones we've invented heretofore.
That leads me to ask, though, where is the balance between spending on research and development and on operations?
So I think there's government investment is important, and so is private investment. And the way I like to think of that is to say, when you want to take a high-risk mission or a high level of R&D, that's typically where government is going to invest. The private sector often helps operationalize activities that are going on in space. And so another way to think about this is that private finance actually is an accelerator of innovation because it's looking to it seeks differentiation between different ideas, and it looks at risk in a different way than the government does. And frankly, we're able to take risk in space today because of the government investments in space for the past 6 decades.
As someone who specializes in this, Kevin, what do you see as the greatest risks and the greatest returns?
So in terms of risk, I mean, we certainly have a challenge with what we'll call space safety and sustainability. I spent a lot of time while I was the Commerce Department on this topic, and I've spent a lot of time since I left. The extent to which there is a whole range of debris in space, ranging from small paint chips to larger rocket bodies, by some estimates as much as 130 million pieces of debris moving around at 17,000 miles per hour. Even a paint chip moving that quickly can do considerable harm. And so we have to get our hands around the safety aspect of that. How are we going to make sure that operators can operate safely in such a debris field? The first concern, of course, is the International Space Station, astronauts on board the space station, and the lives of astronauts. That's the paramount concern we have in space. And then the extent to which we want to make space sustainable so that we can do all the exciting things in the space economy that are envisioned for the future, the things we expect out of the space economy.
Is enough thought being given to this sustainability? Because what we hear in the news, obviously, is the number of satellites being launched, the things that are being pushed into space have gone up radically in numbers, but people don't tend to talk about all the debris and stuff as much.
So I think there's a lot more talk about it. There needs to be a lot more action about it. And, I tend to think about this in a private sector way, because for years a lot of people have said to me, the private sector doesn't care about this, Kevin. And I think if you thought about that for just a moment, you'd think that's a really silly way to think about it, because if I'm a business owner, I want to think about the ability to create new sources of revenue, new sources of profit, and new innovations in space that will make me continue to provide services to people. So I think about this very much like I thought about cybersecurity about 10 years ago. CEOs would say, gee, I don't want to spend a lot of money on cybersecurity. The government will tell me if I have a problem and we'll deal with it. Well, it didn't play out that way, obviously. I think safety and sustainability will come in the same direction here, which is owners that want to ensure mission assurance for their missions, for their customers, are going to see this as a necessary cost of doing business. And so there's a lot of talk. It's a very complex problem. It's got technical complexities. It's got organizational complexities. Different governments have different regulatory actions that govern how people go to space and what they do in space. So it's a hugely complicated problem. Here too, though, I think that the private sector will lead the way in saying, what are the practical rules of the road? For obvious reasons, the international governance situation right now is complicated, and if nothing else, it just moves slower than technology and policy typically do. And so the private sector will come up with ways to say, this is how we should actually approach these issues. These are practical rules of the road that ideally, if they're good, will be codified ultimately in some sort of international governance regime.
I'll touch a little bit more on that in a second, but I'm curious, is there enough money, for example, being raised? Is there a shortage of money in space investment, or is it still quite attractive, and is it attracting money?
No, I think it's attracting money again. I think we've gone through this dip in that 21 to 24 timeframe that we talked about. And again, it's not only because of things that went on in the space business. Space is a place where patient capital is needed. It's not something where you turn around in 3 years. And so there are sort of inherent things to the space business per se, but there are also global economic and geopolitical issues that also change that. Now we see people ready to come back in. We have a new administration in the United States that is going to focus a lot on going back to space in a more aggressive way. It's always been a bipartisan concern in the United States to go back with a vibrant commercial space industry. So is there enough money? You know, I think what all business people would tell you, there's never enough money, but certainly people are coming back into the market now with a better sense of what's being done, why it's important. For a lot of ideas, space has really given us, and this is maybe where we merge your question, your very first question, this is where we merge the space exploration piece with the space commerce piece. Some of the science that is going on the International Space Station is absolutely breathtaking. One of the highlight projects for last year was the 3D printing of heart tissue. Okay, and you think to yourself, that is an incredible technology, and there are many, many other examples of that. The question with this is, can anybody actually make a profit going to space, absorbing the cost of going and bringing it back, okay? Or, in another context, is it so important for us in many ways that governments just decide to fund that as an operational capability? We're seeing a lot of people explore these areas.
Is it something the general public can invest in? If I suddenly say I want to invest in space as a member of the public, is it something I can do? Oh, absolutely. There are a number of companies. I want to say about 100 companies that are public in space. There are many more that are private behind that. There's a huge ecosystem. Obviously, we have one in the United States and Europe, even here in the Middle East, Japan, all have vibrant ecosystems for exploring different pathways to space. How have advancements in launch technology and reusable rockets affected the economics of space? So they've hugely affected it. In fact, when you go back 15, 20 years, if you were an entrepreneur and said, I have a great idea, it might take you 5 years to get a launch. It might cost you $10 million to get a launch. Well, there are very few people that have a great idea that can actually pursue that. Not zero, but there are very few people. And so what we have today is a launch ecosystem that actually allows an entrepreneur to say, gee, I've got an idea, I'm going to try it, okay? And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, maybe you adjust it, but then I can go back 6 months later and launch the replacement. And that's an innovative process that we have that is very, very different. The other thing is that I'm excited about the space economy. For most applications historically, the space business was a we'll invent it, you figure out how to use it business, okay? And what we have today is so many other sectors of the economy are saying, gee, space is now more affordable and more accessible even, I can get to it, that I'm going to put down a $250,000 R&D project. And so when we look at fields like agriculture and pharmaceuticals and material science and things like that, now we're going to create a whole new wave of innovation based on the fact that other people can now leverage space and create a whole new set of demands for space. You know, Kevin, one of the worries that people have when it comes to something being commercialized is if it's profit-driven, then there's the risk of the profit motive causing cutbacks in areas that could affect safety. We've seen it to some degree in the airline industry in places. What risk is there that, in this, if there's a huge surge for profit motive, that space becomes one of those that's also vulnerable? And of course, the consequences could be even worse there. How can we avoid that? That the profit drives cutbacks and things, or cutting corners? So I think we have a sense of safety in space. Again, for 6 decades, the experiences that we've had mostly through the governments are now allowing us to understand places we can take risk in space and maybe where we ought not. And governments still regulate space, okay? Now, we want them to regulate in a light touch way. We want them to consider the entrepreneur's interest in addition to safety and security considerations, which have always been classic ways that regulators have thought about space. And there are actually ways for regulators to encourage industry in a way that encourages the business forward in a responsible way. In the past, when people talked about the space race, it was largely the US and Russia, Soviet Union, I guess, at that time, and then China came into the picture. But now we have many more initiatives, Europe, India, Japan, and others. Give me a sense of how many, because you mentioned it a little earlier about people coming in from other countries, how many nations have space programs now? So I think the last time we looked, there were almost 100 countries that had some kind of a capability in space. And, you see the United States, China, Japan, Europe being some of the larger
participants in space, but you also see countries now exploring this. This is another place where countries are very excited about what can be done with the space economy. Years ago, I had an interview with a senior minister, and he was very excited about space. And he said to me, Kevin, I'm going to have, for my country, I'm going to have a launch capability and a sensing capability and a navigation. And I said, respectfully, Minister, no, you're not, because you can't afford it, actually. But what we are seeing is we're seeing countries starting to focus on what space can actually do for them in terms of connecting people on Earth, in terms of bringing education to people that could not have it historically, in terms of understanding how we're making use of resources on the planet. These are compellingly important. And then space, of course, is so centrally linked to the data economy that we use in our lives every single day. We see, in addition to those 90 or 100 space programs, we see tremendous interest in space around the world.
Well, I was going to say, we are sitting here in the Middle East where there has been a push into the space programs. How ambitious has this region been from what you've discovered?
Oh, I think it's been very ambitious. We're sitting here in Dubai, and the Emirates have done a tremendous job with their plans for Martian exploration. They have a satellite that's actually surveying Mars as we speak. They've done it very, very conscientious of the need to someday explore Mars and to basically land people on Mars. We have those same aims as well. We see interest in Riyadh, obviously, and now growing a space capability. And so we see you don't have to be a big country anymore to do this. I like to use the Luxembourg example. For example, there is a playful joke in Luxembourg that we use more space, we occupy more space in space than we occupy here on Earth. And so it's not confined to only people who have large geographies on Earth. You do need to spend some money on it, obviously. And what I like to say is it's one thing to be enthusiastic about space. It's another thing to be almost calculating about how does a country actually focus? What does it focus on? To go back to my minister friend, he was just being excited about space. He wasn't thinking critically about the industrial base. He wasn't thinking about academia in his country to say, what is the best chance for me to leverage those capabilities and skills for the things that our country wants to do in space? Regional partnerships and global partnerships are also important as well in that context.
On that note, how much, at a global level, how much is there collaboration versus competition?
So I think there's both, actually. I mean, we talk about ourselves being in a race with the Chinese at this point. It's interesting to see how how China has come along in the last few decades very, very aggressively. There's a tremendous amount of competition, but there's also cooperation. In the first Trump administration, we had the initiation of the Artemis Accords. That's 50 nations that have actually committed to going back to the moon permanently and sustainably. We'll see how that's adjusted in the second Trump administration. But when we go to the moon or we go to space, we don't just go with the things that we have, we bring our values to space. And so when you look at the Artemis principles, those principles really are about how we intend to share data, to provide for safety of astronauts and others. So there's a lot of basis for cooperation. On the military side, there's also historically been, at least for the United States and what we call the Five Eyes countries, there's been tremendous cooperation in this area, in addition to other partners. We just had the Japanese Prime Minister in Washington, and he and the President have actually reaffirmed pursuits in space together.
How is the role of companies like SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, and Blue Horizon, Jeff Bezos' company, two richest men in the world, how has that evolved the space sector in the past decade? And have you worked with them?
So we've worked with them. Certainly, we're in the government. We have contacts with them in the private sector. Obviously, in my current role, I mean, what they've essentially done is lower the launch costs to get to orbit that we talked about a little bit earlier. It's making space more accessible. It's also in Starlink, you're having, this is a second service that SpaceX is providing. You're providing communications to people that historically did not have access to communications. And so we're seeing tremendous capability to be leveraged by virtue of being able to get to space easier, faster, cheaper than we did historically.
I want to touch on something we briefly referred to. It's SpaceX's Starship project.
Yes.
The largest liftoff, I think, that occurred and it's supposed to have the capability of taking like up to 100 passengers into space down the road. How much has that advanced the prospect of human presence in space?
Well, I think it's advanced all manner of space. I mean, the test flights have gotten more and more successful, obviously. And as I think I said earlier, this is, this could be the railway express of the space economy. It will certainly, in the first instance, allow us to get lots of material into space in a much more significant way than we have historically. The human piece will come at some point, probably sooner rather than later. One of the trends in the space community that I can remember from my time is that people would come in and say, hey, I've got a great new idea. And historically, someone would say, gee, that's okay. Come talk to me in a decade. Come back and talk to me in a decade about that. That's not the world we live in anymore. The world we live in today is these technology changes may actually be coming so quickly that the capabilities are years away, maybe even months away, frankly, as people are investing in them in multiple ways. And so with Starship, we see a huge potential not only to bring considerable amount of space objects, et cetera, manufacturing plants, things like that into space relatively quickly, not small piece by small piece, but then the human piece will come behind that, obviously.
A lot of people, Mike, sort of knowing how big SpaceX has become and Blue Horizon, these companies become so big and so significant in progressing things, there might be a feeling that certainly within the USA, the private sector has now kind of taken over. Has the government effectively stepped down or been pushed out because of this? No,
I wouldn't say it's been pushed out at all. Again, as I said before, both government investment and private investment are very important for our space pursuits writ large. They're not pushed out at all. Obviously, the United States government governs the activities that go on in space, as do every other governments that are managing space activities for their countries. We wrote an op-ed back in September on this topic, on the themes that governments had to think about in order to have an effective contribution and grow their contributions in the space economy. And so governments have not gone away in any way, shape, or form. They're still going to provide important management, governance, and then obviously some levels of funding. But the reality is, around the world, the commercial sector is the predominant player in space.
It may sound like a strange question, but is NASA still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. Hugely relevant. It's going to undergo some changes now, we see. But the space agencies are relevant because they understand what scientific priorities there are. They actually set technology challenges for industry. So an example, one of the top priorities for NASA this past year was surviving the lunar night as one of the technology challenges. And say, well, why would you want to do that? If we're going to have a vibrant lunar economy, we need to be able to survive what's a very cold and dark lunar night. That's going to be a force for innovation in something we worked on in the last Trump administration, which was space nuclear power, small modular reactors, because that's the difference between a small lunar economy, mostly driven by government investment, to one which is much larger, much more commercial in nature. And so that's just one example. So governments are still very, and NASA specifically, hugely important.
Something we did touch on early on too was AI, and how AI seems to be ready to revolutionize what we do in space. How do you see its impact in these kind of matters?
So we're seeing it already impact in multiple ways, and I think people are implementing it carefully. There's a lot of noise about AI right now, in addition to the things that are being done usefully. And I think in the first instance, what we have is we see AI being used to make things more efficient. So in the satellite imagery world, historically, and I'm going back many years now, we used to have light tables, and we had film, and we had to actually find images and say, where is yesterday's image of that same place relative to today? Okay, we're not in that world anymore, thank goodness. But what we also see now is an ability to quickly, using AI, bring together similar scenes or similar kinds of phenomenology. So I may have satellite imagery, but I may have 10 other data sets that I want to bring together and correlate very quickly. I have the same thing in communication satellites. Where do I have throughput that I can take advantage of at a much faster than human capacity? So I think that's one aspect at the lower end. But AI will certainly also be more exploratory. We use AI to actually help with complex processes on board spacecraft. We're going to use them. I know the European Space Agency has a project right now designed to use AI when spacecraft get to places that nothing is known about. And so how will it make a decision about the environment when none of us has seen it before?
There's no data on it.
There's no data on it, exactly. And so what's your best guess at that point based on all the scientific knowledge that we have? So it's going to have huge potential for the space business. As I said, I think it's going to be applied carefully to start, and it's going to be applied to great effect, and once again changing the economics of what's going on in space.
So very recently on the show, I had the former chief business officer of Google X, that X development as it's known now. We talked about artificial intelligence, and Mo Godat, who's a real wizard with AI stuff, said that he thinks that once someone has got kind of top position in AI, once one player becomes the dominant one, it will take over and no one else will, that will never reverse. Is that the case with space? That when someone really gets the kind of reaches the top in terms of what it's doing in space, one of the countries, maybe the USA, that no one else will ever be able to catch up or be able to overtake it?
Well, so we've always been the dominant power in space, you know, ever since the Cold War, and we're going to continue to push in that direction to maintain American leadership, not just by ourselves, but with our partners as well, as we talked earlier. And so I think it's still a place where we're going to see competition. There has to be cooperation around a certain number of issues, like the space debris issue, the extent to which we're letting operators know what's happening. There has to be some level of cooperation with the Russians and the Chinese, frankly. But I don't think this is a winner-take-all space. I think the challenge in space here from a military perspective is going to be, can we not only protect the assets that we have today, and that, again, includes those human beings, those good souls that are sitting on the International Space Station, but can we also do it in such a way that protects the growth of space commerce? You know, that's very much like the naval metaphor. If you're a fan of historical metaphors, it's very much like the naval metaphor, that the Navy's role was as much to protect commerce on the high seas as other national security and military functions.
Talking of naval issues, we're seeing, you know, accusations of urgent, you know, essential cables being cut underwater in conflicts and so on. That, in theory, could translate into space too, then.
It can, but be careful, because the capacity in space, you know, we get very excited about all the capacity we have. We're not quite there yet. There's so much traffic that transits those undersea cables that we just don't have the capacity. Some people think it's less than 10% that could be kicked up to space. And so that's another reason why we should expect to see more and more growth in space as a source of resilience for things that we do on Earth for our national security.
Kevin, how do you see the impact of space tourism affecting the space economy?
So I think for all of my excitement about the space economy, the space tourism area is something that I think for a while is going to remain the purview of a relatively small number of people that are going to space. You know, we just had a debate with a colleague in New York City on a show, and the question was, why commercial space stations? Because obviously post-International Space Station, there will be at least one, maybe more, commercial space stations that will come into the market to provide those services. And the debate was, what's the value proposition for those? And my colleague's comment was, it's all about space tourism. I don't think that's correct. I think you'll continue to have space tourists, but you're also going to see continuation of the huge demand we have for research in the microgravity environment. I mean, today it's very hard to get, as the International Space Station gets closer and closer to its end, you're seeing tremendous demand for research, and it's pretty much sold out. You know, I mean, sometimes people can get a very interesting project on board, but I think the research premise is the premise for space stations going forward. You'll always have tourists, but I think for the long run, that's not a huge business. I've just been working on a project back in Washington, and in fact, when you look as recently as 2019, there are estimates of thousands of launches by today, mainly because of space tourism. That didn't happen, and there's lots of good reasons why it didn't, but I think that's pretty much the trend we're going to stay on.
Recently in the news, there's been word of an asteroid that might just hit Earth. Now, if that is the case, an asteroid's heading for Earth, and a mission has to be mounted to divert it, take care of it somehow, who's responsible? Who pays for it? How does that get organized?
Well, so those are questions that's a big question, but it's not the only question of that sort. Obviously, NASA has been doing some experimentation on planetary defense. The DART, what was called the DART mission, was successful in diverting an asteroid. And so obviously we're going to worry a lot about that. The key is sensing those, making sure we have a keen understanding of the ones that are really worrisome, the ones where we might have to take action. Who's going to pay for it? I mean, we're all going to pay for it at that point. If it comes that close that we have to go against it, we're all going to pay for it.
How far are we off mining minerals, essential minerals and things of asteroids?
Oh, I think on asteroids, so it's already been proven. The Japanese had a successful mission. We had a successful mission in the United States. And so I think the asteroid mining market is still a little bit of ways off. But the moon is going to represent a place where we're going to learn more about how to do that. Again, in the lunar economy now, we have people going that are bringing landers to the moon, that are going to be doing experiments, picking up lunar regolith, understanding what the material makeup is. The key scientific question on the moon is the quality of the water ice, because if the water is of sufficiently high quality and can be processed, that becomes your fuel to keep going. And so that's a hugely important question.
We touched on it a bit, but who will ultimately regulate issues when it comes to space? Now, of course, there are governments. As you say, there's already a number of agreements in place. But if private money starts to dominate, how much will they have an influence on how these regulations are set?
Well, so I think they'll have some influence through their national governments. Obviously, there's a system in place through the United Nations to have discussions about this. The Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is one important forum. And so those are just slow-going discussions because you have to get consensus decision-making and things like that. And so, again, I think you'll see more emphasis on national governments regulating. Okay, nobody wants to be irresponsible. They want to be responsible. But I think one of the key questions in the future is going to be, to what extent can the private sector actually benefit from the things that they're actually doing in space? You don't want to dampen the entrepreneurial spirit. You want to be responsible. And so protecting sites on the moon and things like that are some of the early decisions that are coming up in this area.
Knowing the potential that's out there, Kevin, what risk is there of a kind of Wild West style gold rush into space? I
think, that's a phrase that people often use in space. I mean, I think we're a little more sensible than that. There's certainly potential to do some things very, very rapidly. I think you want to see entrepreneurship in space continue at a fairly aggressive pace. You want to see people understanding what can be done, what might be done, and take advantage of that. Will there be uncertainties just as there were in the wild, to stick with the metaphor, in the Wild West? Of course there will be. And in some cases, the person who gets there first will be able to take advantage of things first. It's really simple.
There's also the issue of, like the Wild West, weapons. I mean, at this stage, what regulations are there to control weaponry in space?
So, of course, the Outer Space Treaty essentially precludes the use of nuclear capabilities in space. And the Russians, there was a lot of hubbub last year. The Russians may have actually violated that premise. And so there's not a lot of rigorous international law about the use of weapons in space, because what constitutes a weapon? This mug could be a weapon in space. And so there's a lot of work to be done in that area, and it's not just kinetic activities, but it's also cyber activities and things like that.
Well, I was thinking, with a world that seems increasingly divided, what risk is that those geopolitical divisions shift into space too?
They absolutely could. There's a real risk of that, and we have to work very hard to make sure that they don't, because of the promise that at least I've been talking about here, all the things that we're going to rely on and that we expect from outer space. I've said publicly, I think we could see more economic benefit from space in our lifetimes than we've seen in all of human history. That's a pretty bold statement, but it's not automatic. We have to deal with issues like this, where there's geopolitical risk that could turn to military conflict. We have to deal with the debris problem. We have to deal with a lot of things. So don't take the first part of my statement as only, we have to do the other things that actually make space safe and sustainable for the future.
I should point out to our viewers and listeners, Kevin, that apart from space commerce and your experience with that, which is pretty broad, you've also worked in defense and national security.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, from your perspective, having especially worked with people like Donald Trump in his first presidency, what does the U.S. fear from Russia and Chinese in terms of their intentions in space?
So we really are concerned about missiles. Obviously, the president has now signed a new executive order for an Iron Dome system that will prevent ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, others from coming into the country. That will be a huge investment for that specific purpose. And so I think that's one concern, obviously. The other thing is that we're concerned about the irresponsible behavior in space. In November of 2021, the Russians launched a kinetic ASAT test from Earth into space to destroy one of their defunct satellites. That was really a message that said, if we do it to that, we can do it to you. But in the process, created a tremendous amount of debris that we all have to deal with. Okay, it's not just against any one country. We all have to deal with that debris. And that debris wound up creating what operators called squalls of notice. Because if you're around up there flying in orbit, then you're getting notices all the time that you're at risk of being collided. And so what you have to do is make hard decisions about whether or not you're going to maneuver. Fuel is gold in space. And so you have to make some very hard choices about whether you're going to move out of the way of something or just, hold your breath. And that's not the way we want to do this. We want to get much better at those kind of things.
As you indicated, even the smallest amount of debris can cause a huge amount of damage too.
Yes.
How much time, in terms of time and resources that nations are now putting into space, considering these concerns, the militarization and so on, how is that balance being achieved between positive commercial interests and the kind of more risky defense stuff?
So I think we're seeing more of a balance. Again, as I said earlier, the numbers from 2023 are essentially pointing to the fact that countries are investing much more in defense than they did historically. And they're still investing in civil space. And meanwhile, we have investments in commercial space. The Chinese have investments in commercial space as well. Commercial means a very different thing in Beijing than it does in Washington or in Paris or wherever it would be. But so we're hoping that the positive benefit of what is going on from commercial activities will be one piece of deterrent, only one piece, of course, and that things that are done to bolster security in space, like the creation of the U.S. Space Force, we've just had the 5th anniversary of that, and so that is partly there designed to protect the commerce that we anticipate taking advantage of.
From your work with him in the past, how would you describe Donald Trump's interest in space matters?
So I think the first administration was a strong signal of where Trump and the rest of the administration was, for sure. We put out more space policy on very interesting issues in the first Trump administration. In fact, the prevailing national space policy of the United States is the Trump national space policy. Truth be known, there's been large continuity in space activities for the past 5 administrations in the United States. The difference, and the difference as reflected in the commercial space policy, in the national space policy, I should say, is the ability to leverage commercial, to harness the innovation of the private sector. And so I think you've seen already, we're going to see much more interest in space, much more assertive interest in space. And that's going to take a couple of forms. I think that where the government is spending money, it's going to be, and this is where your question about is NASA important, NASA will continue to put more money into the commercial sector, especially under what we expect Administrator Jared Isaacson when he's confirmed. Okay. Secondly, we'll expect to get another look at the regulatory environment and the extent to which these things allow are permissive. People often think about regulations as blocking things. There are ways to write regulations, and we wrote one in the first administration that encouraged the growth of the commercial space sector.
Well, during his inauguration speech, Donald Trump announced his plan to put the Stars and Stripes, the U.S. flag, on Mars. How much of a boost did that give to entrepreneurs, investors, and so on?
Oh, I think it gave an extraordinary boost to entrepreneurs and investors. It's yet another dimension of our space program. I think a lot of people have interpreted that as coming at the expense of all of the things that have already been planned on the moon. Okay, I actually don't think that will be the case. I think we will see parallel developments. And in fact, the Mars program will actually be helped and accelerated by virtue of changing, adapting some of the things that we currently have in what NASA calls the Moon to Mars program.
Now, of course, you'll be familiar with the American astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson,
of course,
who considers the project of a mission to Mars as an incredibly expensive vanity project with no prospect of return on investment. How do you regard that viewpoint?
So I think, look, it is in our nature, it's in our human nature to explore. And so how you get to Mars, thinking about, occupying Mars, again, here in the Emirates, there is a view that at some point in the next century, we should think about putting a colony on Mars of people to live there, learn about the red planet, et cetera. So I don't know that it really depends on how it's done. There are completely legitimate scientific and even other questions about going to Mars that we do need to explore.
I know, Kevin, as someone who now is so embedded in studying space commerce and advising on it, that you see the importance of the skill sets that are needed to be developed for a future in space. Take me through some of those, because again, I don't know how much there is available for people to go out there and learn about it in schools, for example, but what are the kind of skill sets we're talking about?
Riz, this is a hugely important question, so thanks for asking it. Talent is one of the key inputs to the space economy, and we have a temptation to think that the only kinds of skills we'll need are the scientific and technical skills. And certainly we're going to need as much of those as we can get our hands on. And so those of you that are in PhD programs and engineering programs, keep going. But what you realize is that in the space economy, okay, it really is a broad-based economy. From what I've said, all along here, there are different market verticals that people are pursuing. Space medicine, for example. How are we going to get these bodies to space in a more effective way without harm, or with as little harm as possible? We know from the Apollo program that the investments in space medicine paid back tenfold, if not more, to us here on Earth in the way we think about medicine. And I've given you one example. There's some other examples of medicine on the moon. And so the implications for talent are enormous, because I do need those people that are going to help build the rockets and build the satellites and things like that. But I'm going to need a whole ecosystem of all of the other industries that are participating. I'm going to need people that understand food. I'm going to need people that understand materials. And so, as I like to say, when we went to the moon for 5 days, you could put up with anything. Since we're committed now to going back permanently and sustainably, that has huge implications for all of the other things that we're going to need. If you're going to go for 9 months to the moon, you're going to need a lot of other things than just a quick ride and then come back. And so this is important for retraining workers. It's important in the K through 12 educational system, because what you don't want a youngster to do is to say, oh, I'll never be an astronaut, I need to drop out. And so that's a very important, we need all of the skills that we have here on Earth.
So that actually leads me on to the story of the chef. Because you and I both travel a lot when we're told food doesn't taste so good up in the air. But tell me what happened.
Exactly. So I, all of my space friends who've heard this story 1,000 times will groan if they see this. But it's a story that I think makes the point that I was just making. And so when I was at Commerce, we actually held an event that was designed to bring women and minorities into the space business. And we had a collection of folks in a room, probably about the size of this room, and a lot of scientists, a lot of engineers, technical specialists, et cetera. And a woman walked into the room and she said in a fairly elevated voice, she said, "I'm a chef." And, she got the usual sort of gee, did she come into the wrong room? You know, what is she doing here? Why is she coming here? And in the same voice, she said, I understand that food tastes terrible in space, and it's going to be my job to make it taste a whole lot better. And if you understand that story, it means that we need artists, we need chefs, we need business people, we need all sorts of folks from so many different walks of life to fuel this trillion-dollar space economy.
What it's basically saying is that life on Earth has to be replicated in space. That means we have to take everything with us, our culture, our music, our arts, and everything else.
Yeah, and again, as I said before, we take our values to space when we go, and that's very important. And so we have to reflect those things in what we bring with us and how we adapt them for living in a very different space environment.
Now, we started talking, this conversation, talking about the value of the global space economy. And for someone who's devoted so much of your, especially the recent career, to this, what value would it be for you to take a trip into space?
Oh, I've been asked this question in interviews before. In fact, I did an interview with the BBC, and the very last question was, are you ready to go to Mars, Mr. O'Connell? And my answer is, I'm not going to go to Mars at this point in my life, but I'm happy to help anybody else that wants to try to get there.
Kevin, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. It's such a big subject. So I'm glad we had a chance to cover so much ground.
Thank you for having me, Riz. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Kevin. Thank you, sir. Well, there's plenty to think about from that fascinating conversation with Kevin O'Connell, a man with his head in the stars and his feet on the ground. The future may be sooner than you think. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, the US President Donald Trump suggests Ukraine was to blame for its invasion by Russia and the resulting war. President Zelenskyy accusing Trump of parroting Moscow's narrative, saying he lives in a Russian disinformation space. The Kremlin says that President Putin and President Trump could hold a face-to-face meeting before the end of February. And tests confirm that Pope Francis has pneumonia in both lungs. The 88-year-old pontiff remains at a Rome hospital. Hello and welcome to the programme. First, the US President Donald Trump appears to be suggesting that Ukraine is to blame for the war with Russia. Well, he made those comments at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida just hours after US and Russian officials met in Riyadh for their first round of talks. Well, Ukraine was not included at those talks. While seizing on complaints that Ukraine was denied a seat at the negotiating table, President Trump said that they could have made a deal sooner. Here's what he said.
Invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic. It's so sad.
The US President speaking there. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Solomia Boborovska, who is a Ukrainian MP and deputy head of Ukraine's delegation to NATO, who joins us now from Kyiv. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I just want to get your initial thoughts and your reaction to that statement from the US president suggesting Ukraine should never have started the war and could have made a deal to prevent it. How do you respond to that?
You know, we started to have the joke in Ukraine. It's better to fall asleep earlier than to listen to Trump's comments in the interview, because when we get up and see what he said just couple hours ago, and it's nighttime in Ukraine, this time it was very disgusting. Ukrainians do not accept that, and our recommendation, and it remains to be, and it seems to be, as it happened, 10 years ago with the Minsk agreement, when someone started to make deal about Ukraine without Ukraine. That's the first very moment, and we will continue to push on that. And President Zelenskyy very clearly said that we do not recognize the negotiations that happened in the Emirates. That's the first. In Saudi Arabia, that's the first point. The second one, what President Trump said, that it was total Russian narratives, starting about the 4% of supporting Zelenskyy and finishing with the point about we have to explore every dollar which was sent to Ukraine. I think that they have to check their spendings within their budget system, because here in Ukraine we can count every artillery shot or bullet that we've got from US. I think it was too much with his comment. My recommendation for his administration, that's just to take the history book about the history of Ukraine and the history of Russians, and finally to understand the Ukrainian mentality. Because at the end of the time and all these negotiations, we are only just on the beginning of this way. Everything will be decided in Ukraine, on Ukrainian soil, with Ukrainians who showed their position on 24th of 22nd year, 2022. Because according to US perspective, we had to lose in 3 days and in 7 days. And that's what they pushed. And that's why they pushed to move Zelenskyy from Kyiv, government from Kyiv, MPs from Kyiv, that Kyiv has to fall. We are sorry, 3 years of the big, huge war, very painful for Ukraine, and we will still stand and continue to stand under the Ukrainian flag in Kyiv.
Okay, and you mentioned lots of points there, and just going back to what President Trump's been saying, this 4% approval rating for President Zelenskyy, I mean, I'm just wondering where he got that number from, because that's not what the opinion polls in Ukraine are saying, is it?
Absolutely. That's what I mentioned. Absolutely. That's a total Russian narratives. Russian narrative is 4%. Russian narrative is to demand elections. That Zelenskyy is not legal on his position, but he is. And no one in Ukraine claims about the elections. Neither about presidential nor parliamentarian or local one. We all understand about the martial law, the procedures. We all understand that no one will go to Kharkiv or to Kherson, to observe the elections. And first of all, Americans will go, for example. At least 57% Zelenskyy has the support. And what Trump said, that's quite 100% of the Russian narrative. Today we have the special representative of Trump on Ukraine, Mr. Kravchuk, and I hope he will bring back messages to Washington, D.C. Ukrainian position, clear understanding about the polls, and support of Zelenskyy, and all this bullshit which started from the Russian side, how to push their messages and press on Ukraine, how we should react or act or whatever, or obey US. That's not the way.
Yeah, you mentioned the US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg. He's in Kyiv paying a visit. Just wondering what sort of messages, what sort of objectives, and what sort of achievements you want to come out of this visit?
I think I hope President Zelenskyy and his team will pass him messages with our peace plan, with our plans on the front line, with the very clear plans of Russians on the front line. And when Lavrov said that they are not attacking the Ukrainian civil energy and infrastructure. We just got two big, huge, for the last 2 nights, attacks on Mykolaiv and Odessa, which are on the Black Sea shore. Mykolaiv is totally out of heating and electricity. Odessa Children's Hospital was hit, plus energy infrastructure as well. And 200,000 people are without heat now when we have the 11 degrees below zero. I think all these points we will pass. We will show how they use the Northern Koreas, what's going on with their promising, with Russian promising, and all the stuff which is going on between Ukraine and Russia and so on. What can be compromised? What our demands are and our list of proposals are. And I think President Zelenskyy will be back to his peace plan. Of course, about the withdrawing the troops. We understand that probably it's almost impossible. But no one, probably Kursk will be the one of the issues as well to discuss. Kursk operation and Kursk region, which is the territory part of it is under Ukrainian control, and so on and so on. I hope all these messages will be back to DC.
One message that is being sent back across the Atlantic towards Donald Trump from your president is that President Trump, he says, is living in a Russian disinformation space. Now, I'm just wondering here, given what you've told me and the situation on the battlefield looking extremely challenging, whether you think it's advisable, no matter what he said, for President Zelenskyy to be baiting the US president. What do you think?
I think our point is to show the truth, what's going on really, and not to accept Ukraine as it happened 3 years ago with Afghanistan. That's the 21st century. It's not the 15th. If they will be out, we will continue to fight for European support, artillery, ammunition, military support, military personnel as well. Why not? It changes a lot. And for the last month and a half, I think Europe has finally to wake up, and I hope they woke up and took out the pinky glasses that they lost the last 3 years of preparing what Russia can do. And actually, Russians said very clearly, and they sent the message: if Europe won't sit as the force part of during the negotiations on Ukraine, they're not allowed to send our troops. Their troops here, they're not allowed to send our ammunition, and so on and so on. We all have to keep the strong position, because at the end, as I told, Ukrainians as a nation will keep fighting. As Trump cannot decide instead of Ukrainian parliament how to change constitution. That's impossible. With all respect to Americans, what they did for the last 3 years.
We're not quite 1 month into this new Trump administration. I'm just wondering what his return to the White House has done to morale there in Ukraine.
You know, we had a really huge expectation before his inauguration, and even in the trenches, in army, I've heard a lot like, okay, Trump will come, everything will be done. We are waiting for the mobilization, and so on and so on. He will make Putin to free situation. He will help us to have a ceasefire or whatever. But but for the last almost months, Ukrainians are very, not to say even disappointed, but we are against of what he is doing and of what he's showing, because it shows that we are now -1 ally on the front. We can stuck, yes, with ammunition, and that again shows that we are alone on the ground, except Nordic, Baltic, plus UK, that who can really help us on a deal, but not with the words, And I would say people are frustrated. That's the same in army, in media. within journalistic this circle, civil society, so many different messages, but with the cold hat, we are saying, okay, it's just the beginning. We have to keep strong, just to wait, because the news are too fast. Each night, news, and we have to react. But maybe it's just informational noise.
That's something we're going to be talking about in a minute with one of our guests, trying to sort of decipher Trump's language here and what his technique is, what he's trying to achieve. One thing I just want to ask you about, we haven't got much time left, but Dr. Stephanie Babs, who is the former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General, spoke to us yesterday, and she seemed to be saying that President Trump has switched sides. I don't know what you think of that. Do you think people in Ukraine would largely agree with her?
You mean switch side with whom, or with like that Europe has to take responsibility for the security?
Yeah, in the sense that he's turning his back on Europe, and he seems to be welcomed with open arms by the Russians. That seemed to be the essence of what she was saying.
But like Europe knew that it can happen. They were afraid of that. They were afraid even last summer. They understood that they could face this message and this position. And, I was really not surprised, but I know that it was a big mess and frustration within the Munich security conference, when J.D. Vance said that, like, no more you have the same values with the U.S. and blah, 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 blah. But it was quite expected to get this position. And we, starting from the last year, Ukrainians, on each meeting, we said, like, you have to take leadership. Please decide who can take this leadership. Germany, UK, France, who is among the leaders, who can be able to take leadership not only about Ukraine, but about your security in Europe. Because US will say no to you once upon a time. And they said, like, very, very, very fast, like in 25 days. I think as long as Musk will be there in the administration, and this chaotic vibes will go from him through the whole institutions. Maybe they can destroy the institutions. Well, I don't know. They are moving quite fast. That's what they were building for the 100 years in other countries, and in US started, to collapse. We will see.
Do you think Ukraine can consider the United States an ally still? Do you think Ukraine still trusts the United States?
We still believe in a bipartisan support, Congress, which is one of the main instruments that can influence. That's the first position. The second one, we still hope probably that Putin will show his real face to Trump, and Trump got nervous and will react. That's actually our expectation for now. And I think it's too early to set to put the mark whether U.S. is still ally. There is still Congress and Senate where we have more or less support. That's important, and we will see with time. 180 days Kellogg took as time, public time, to find the solution. I think this 6 months will show really a lot. Who is who, and who is supporting whom, and who is on whose side.
And just lastly, Solomia, I just want to ask you why you think your president cancelled his visit to Saudi Arabia. He was supposed to go there. We understand he's now not going. Why do you think that is?
Yes. He's planning this visit at the beginning of the March, 10th of March, if I'm not mistaken. And he commented this. He doesn't recognize as a president any negotiations. He doesn't want to meet or to cross with the team of US or Russian team that's obviously, and he don't want to put this all together all events together, so there is no sense to go now. It's better to do this in March.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Solomia Bobrovska, Ukrainian
Thank
MP.
you.
Thank you for your time. Well, President Trump's comments have sparked backlash on social media, with Sean Savett, who served as a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council under the former President Joe Biden, accusing Trump of fully accepting Putin's propaganda without question. He said that it sounded as though Trump had bought Putin's propaganda hook, line, and sinker. Well, according to Democrat Jake Oshenshaw, Russia has now won round one, suggesting that the Kremlin had been brought back into the diplomatic fold, even though Ukraine and NATO were excluded. Meanwhile, President Trump's fellow Republican Senator Roger Wicker, chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, agreed that President Putin couldn't be trusted in Ukraine talks. In an interview with CNN, he called him a war criminal.
Do you think that Putin can be trusted in these negotiations?
No. Putin is a war criminal and should be in jail for the rest of his life, if not executed.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Sam Nunberg, former advisor to President Trump, who joins us now from Washington. Thank you so much for being with us. Just want to ask you whether you agree with this outreach by the Trump administration to Moscow. Is this advisable?
Yes, I think that the Trump administration and President Trump are wise to re-engage with Russia. Remember, Joe Biden, his predecessor, had not spoken to Vladimir Putin since 2017, warning Vladimir Putin not to invade Ukraine. Subsequently, what we've had is a major hostilities. The United States has armed Ukraine to the teeth. They've continued to arm them with more lethal weapons. And President Trump had long criticized not only Putin, which he had criticized during his time after leaving office, but the Biden administration. It's also well known within intelligence circles within the U.S. and allies within the U.K. Boris Johnson has said this publicly, that they do not believe Putin would have invaded Ukraine had President Trump won re-election in 2020. He has been handed a extremely unstable situation, and he is trying to bring a peaceful resolution to this. This would not be, from what we hear so far within the negotiations, and what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said in Europe, along the lines with J.D. Vance, this would be in line with what the American people voted for, frankly. President Trump said that he would end this war. Ending wars are not easy. There will be concessions on both sides. But I do feel if you look at President Trump's record in his first term, despite the way he was categorized and maliciously defamed as a Russian stooge, Vladimir Putin was in a much worse situation during his term, his 45th, well, he was the 45th president, as opposed to where he is now.
In terms of those concessions on both sides, I mean, it looks as though President Trump has granted some concessions to Russia before the talks have even got started. I mean, you might not agree with this, so do tell me if you don't. But for example, he said that it looks very unlikely that 20% of Ukrainian territory under Russian control will ever come back under Ukrainian control. He's talked about NATO membership for Ukraine pretty much being ruled out. Has President Trump got any concessions, to your knowledge, in return for the concessions he's already made?
Well, first off, from what we are learning now and from what has been told to allies of the administration, hostilities right now, at least Russia's advances into Ukraine, have been paused. He has been able to have the front line, obviously, less hot. And we have also learned that that not only have hostages been released, which they were last week through Steve Witkoff, we have learned that Vladimir Putin has met with Witkoff for 3 hours, which is one of the reasons why, and I was surprised to see him at the negotiations with the Russians, along with Secretary of State Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Now, remember, these are Rubio and Waltz are two, what we would call hawks. They have said things along the lines that Putin is a thug. but they have also been critical of Vladimir Zelenskyy and the handling of the war from the Biden administration. I would also note that it is simply unsustainable for the U.S. to continue to arm Ukraine to fight a war where they are not making any advances. It is much easier for the U.S. allies such as Britain, France, and Germany to say we will continue arming Ukraine, and Ukraine should fight to the death. But that's what Ukraine is doing. They're fighting to the death. Now, in terms of other concessions, we'll see. I'm not so sure I would call it a concession to say that Ukraine is not going to get back territory that it's lost, because behind the scenes, I wonder what France, Britain, and Germany really thought. Remember, we have been told throughout the years that Ukraine was making this major offensive, that Ukraine would gain territories, and frankly, along that border, it's tragic. But you look at those cities are in rubble. So it doesn't mean to say that Russia is at a good place. I would also note that President Trump on Truth Social was quite critical of Vladimir Putin. President Trump was critical of Putin's decision once he was elected to invade Ukraine. But he's looking to end this and to have re-engagement with Russia. And that's a larger discussion. The more and more that the United States isolates Russia, what we have seen is Russia goes and becomes its strongest ally becomes China. That ultimately is not in U.S. interest, and that is a major switch from Russia on Russia's position. So ultimately, in terms of world stability, which is what President Trump wants, I think that this is the best course, personally, and I agree with what is said. Now, remember, what is said publicly in diplomacy is not necessarily what will ultimately be the final resolutions. But this idea of not entering negotiations with Russia, re-engaging with them. Remember, once again, as I said, Biden has not even spoken to Vladimir Putin since 2017. You do have to enter negotiations on some friendly terms here, and the idea that we can allow Ukraine to enter NATO while they're losing the war is just unfeasible for the United States. And frankly, we would be doing a favor, in my judgment, to our European allies.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, because, I mean, it seems you're quite solicited when it comes to trying to decode and decrypt President Trump. And you know, we heard him saying last night at Mar-a-Lago that Ukraine should never have started this war, and it could have made a deal 3 years ago. And, you know, he's been quite disparaging about the Ukrainian leader, saying he's lagging in the polls with 4%, which, by the way, isn't at all what the latest polls are showing in Ukraine, because we've just spoken to a Ukrainian MP. Mm-hmm. But what's he trying to achieve there? What's the point of doing that with all of this diplomatic activity happening in parallel?
You know, I long remember, as we know in history, that when FDR met with Stalin, he was quite dismissive of Winston Churchill, because this is a way that I think President Trump is trying to show Vladimir Putin that he is not going to listen to Zelenskyy, in terms of Zelenskyy is not directing U.S. policy. Zelenskyy had criticized. He gave an interview in the United States on Meet the Press, which is a Sunday network show that is the most prominent show, most important show. President Trump had previously given an interview after he was elected, and he said he won't agree to any negotiations. He won't agree to the plan or whatever that the United States negotiates directly with Russia. So what I would say is that Donald Trump is trying to show that he holds the cards, he holds the leverage over Zelenskyy, and to show Putin that when he's telling Putin, look, I can negotiate a resolution to this. You're going to have to make concessions on your side, which they ultimately will. He's not going to take a bad deal. He's trying to show that, he's the one in charge here, and that Vladimir Zelenskyy doesn't speak for the United States here, and the United States will be able to push through any agreement that it comes to with Russia.
Just lastly, I mean, what do you make of the first month of the Trump presidency in terms of the overtures that have been made on the diplomatic scene, in terms of the techniques and the tactics that have been employed when it comes to negotiating? What's been your assessment?
Well, the United States has had a lot of successes. The I do like him completely reversing course on the Iranian sanctions. He signed an executive order. And while that's another thing I would say, while he gives lip service to saying that he would like to find a peaceful resolution with Iran, I don't believe that President Trump believes that there will ultimately be a peaceful resolution. You've seen him push Netanyahu, despite Netanyahu's political position domestically, to accept a hostage deal. Whether I support that or not, that is certainly something that his predecessor was unable to do. On the other hand, you have seen him also put pressure on Palestinian leadership and to talk about some kind of reframework into the Gaza issue. Now, what I ultimately see is that Donald Trump understands that he has only 4 years here. He understands exactly the situation that he's inherited. And I would say that that's a different situation, frankly, from 2017. I'm quite pleased to see that President Trump, as he said during his campaign, that he knows the ways of Washington and diplomacy now. I'm quite pleased to see that that, in fact, is true. You know, he simply was a novice in 2017, and now he is a seasoned president. So what I do believe is that we will see big changes going on, including in the Middle East. I believe that Saudi Arabia, in short course, will ultimately come to some public agreement to open relations with Israel, not to say they don't already have relations with Israel. And vis-a-vis NATO, you're going to see him continuing to put pressure on Germany, France, and Britain to get to at least that 2% domestic spending on defense, which I don't believe all three of them did, despite their assurances to President Trump 6 years ago.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you very much indeed for your time today, Sam Nunberg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of more, we can speak now to John Herbst, the former US ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Ambassador. A lot has been said and a lot has been done in the last 24 hours. Just want to pick up on the comments that President Trump made last night at Mar-a-Lago about Ukraine and the Ukrainian president. How do you think they're likely to have gone down with your former host country?
Well, I think they're disappointed in the start of negotiations in Riyadh with just Russia and the United States in attendance. And I think the fact that Zelenskyy expressed some disappointment in that set off President Trump. And we've seen President Trump get set off before. But I call this principally a tempest in a teapot, not more.
Do you agree, though, with the principle of the Trump administration and their decision to end years of isolation and start engagement with Moscow? Do you think that is the right way to go?
I think the following. Trump has laid out a plan that could work to achieve a durable peace. That concept includes two requirements for compromise by Ukraine relating to territory occupied by Russia, relating to possibly joining NATO. Sorry about that. And Zelenskyy has said he's willing to look at compromise, at least on land. The concept also includes 2 points where Russia must compromise. They must accept that to deter future Russian aggression, Ukraine will be substantially armed by the United States and its allies and partners. And they must accept a demilitarized zone with European troops in between, European peace enforcers. Moscow has rejected those two conditions. In order to persuade Moscow to negotiate seriously, I think Trump got it right in the first week as president in the second term when he said he needs to put pressure on Moscow. I think that holding a meeting in Riyadh where you're talking about not just ending Moscow's aggression in Ukraine, but also broadening the U.S.-Russia agenda is not the smart way to get Putin to negotiate seriously.
Yeah, because there are allies of the United States and allies of Ukraine's that are concerned that President Trump might be willing to give up too much for too little. I mean, from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like you're overly concerned about that.
Well, again, I've just said it's not the best way to achieve it. The right way to achieve it is, like Trump said back 4 weeks ago, to put maximum pressure on Moscow economically. And Vance, Vice President Vance, last week said, yes, economic pressure, maybe even military elements are required. So that is the right way to do it. But I mean, Trump is president. He will pursue his own way. And we've seen a comparable approach when he reached out to Kim Jong-il in his first term.
Right, and did that bear fruit? I mean, was that the right way to go?
No, it did not. But it also did not lead to a bad deal. Trump walked away because he realized he was not going to get what he needed. The key is this: Trump wants a deal quickly. Doing it the way they did it in Riyadh is not going to hasten a good deal. It'll slow it down.
Right. So you're saying that a brand new administration, it's not even been a month since they took office, some quite new negotiators at that table in Riyadh yesterday on the American side, and yet veterans on the other side of the table. Just to get some clarity here, are you saying that perhaps they should have held off a little bit before getting started with those talks?
No, what I'm saying is that they should have kept the focus simply on peace, on reaching a peace deal, because Russia would like to normalize relations with the United States. Russia is saying no to the two elements in Trump's own proposals, which could achieve a durable peace. So the way to get Russia to move towards accepting those proposals is not by widening the agenda, which is something Putin wants. It's by putting pressure on Moscow to negotiate. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, and all the while, you've got Europe, NATO, Ukraine feeling extremely sidelined. I mean, are they justified in feeling sidelined here?
I understand the feeling. It's not the way I would conduct American diplomacy, but I think that they shouldn't make too much of it, because Rubio and other officials have said when it comes down to talking about peace, Ukraine will be at the table and Europe will be factored in. And Europe has to have a serious role, because Trump is asking them to play a very serious role, putting their troops into a demilitarized zone between Russian and Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, I mean, some are blaming Europe for not having a clear collective position, and that is one of the reasons why they haven't been as involved as they might be. I mean, do you think perhaps they are, we've seen a flurry of activity in Paris and in other cities in Europe in the last week or so. I mean, do you think they are, for lack of a better word, getting their act together?
I have been impressed by the attention now senior European leaders are paying to the concept of European peacekeepers deployed to Ukraine. That has been the most positive development towards peace over the past week.
Yeah, and the EU feels extremely invested because they have sent $52 billion US worth of weaponry since the invasion began. And if I'm not mistaken, that matches what the US has given. I mean, they clearly have skin in the game.
They have a good deal of skin in the game. They have given more assistance overall than the United States. That's all true. And I think that's understood.
Okay, if Kyiv refuses to accept a deal that's been struck by President Donald Trump, and at the moment we're hearing, some pretty acrimonious exchanges between Mar-a-Lago and Kyiv, can they just fight on and do so without US support? And do you think the European Union and EU, European allies can fill the void left by the US?
Look, the rhetoric regarding what's happened over the past 7 days is far greater than circumstances warrant. There has been, as best as I can tell, no serious discussion between the Russian and American negotiators in Riyadh regarding the actual terms of a peace deal. What we got was kind of a roadmap on things to discuss and the ways to discuss them. That's not unimportant, but it's not the peace deal itself. I don't have any doubt that Ukraine will be at the table when they're hammering out the specific elements under which either a ceasefire or a broader peace deal is achieved.
And just lastly, I mean, Europe's got one lever at its disposal, which is that 200 billion euros of Russian central bank assets that are frozen in the EU. I mean, can Europe use that money to its advantage in terms of getting its voice heard?
There's no doubt about it. But if you're familiar with the issue of the Russian frozen assets, which are principally but not entirely in Europe, you know that the countries that have worked the hardest to get the original deal done to send $50 billion to Ukraine last year were the United States, Canada, and Britain. Germany was a laggard, France was a laggard, Italy was a laggard, and Japan too. It would be very smart if those four countries agreed with the Brits, the Canadians, and the Americans to transfer the remaining, I don't know, I've heard it maybe as much as $300 billion. 50 has already headed to Ukraine, to get that to Ukraine. With that, Ukraine can buy American weapons, European weapons, and also maintain its economy to the extent it enables it to conduct this war. That would be a very good thing for Europe to do, especially, again, those four countries, or the three European countries and Japan, which have not stepped up on this issue.
OK, well, I mean, Tom, we're out of time, but I'd love to talk to you for longer. Thank you very much, though, meanwhile, John Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine. Thanks for your time today. Well, what began as a telephone call in mid-February could now turn into a face-to-face meeting. Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the US President Donald Trump could be set to meet before the end of this month. Well, that would mark the first in-person encounter between a Russian and a US leader since 2021. Well, President Trump himself has confirmed this. Well, both presidents have made waves this week. First, there was their telephone conversation. Then, with the US-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia, at which Ukraine did not participate. Well, for Ukraine, its European allies and NATO, it may feel as though the tables have turned, with Trump seemingly upending his traditional alliances. Well, President Trump's goal of ending the war in Ukraine has stoked fears of a peace deal with President Putin that could undermine Kyiv and Europe's security and alter the geopolitical landscape. Well, Brett Bruen, a former foreign policy advisor in the Obama administration, has expressed his concern that in just a matter of days, President Trump has turned Russia from being, quote, a pariah to a potential partner. Well, for more, we can speak now to Tobias Ellwood, the former UK Defence Minister and former chair of the UK Parliamentary Defence Committee. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Ellwood. Your Twitter feed raises the question, has President Trump switched sides? And you've suggested as well that there's something much bigger happening here. I just want to ask you, first of all, what do you think is happening here?
Well, we simply don't know, because we've seen America enjoy a conference in the desert with Riyadh, but we're not sure. Everybody's been kept out of it, so we don't know what's being discussed. And what America is doing, what Trump has succeeded, is bringing back our arch enemy, rehabilitating President Putin back onto the international stage. Don't forget, this is an individual that's led his country to war, conducted war crimes, is wanted by the international criminal courts. And yet here we see the leader of the West then courting him, having discussions behind the scenes, which we don't know what has been discussed, and actually then parroting the very words that President Putin has been using, including who started this war. And this made me, and I felt a bit disloyal when I put that tweet out, but it made me pose that very question. I was born in New York. I'm half American. I work very closely with our American allies. From a British perspective, the United States is our most important security ally. We rub shoulders on the, in the diplomatic corridors, on the factory floors where we make equipment together, and usually on the battlefields. And yet here we have Donald Trump moving in a direction and moving so fast that it's difficult to keep up. And as I said in my tweet as well, perhaps it's time just to slow down, take stock, a more measured approach, allow the back channels to operate, because clearly President Putin will be delighted to hear that his actual messaging, the words and phrases that he's using, are now being used by the President of the United States of America.
Yeah, let's just talk about some of those back channels and what you think is most likely to be happening in the corridors of power in London and in Washington. I mean, what does Washington need to hear, do you think, from traditional, solid allies like the United Kingdom?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's firstly the operational. There's no doubt about it. We can't do anything in Ukraine to move this on without the American push and the might, and that's clear. When Donald Trump was elected, everybody knew that this would be somehow game-changing. It would shake things up a bit. But nobody anticipated the Munich Security Conference, where we actually saw announcements that America would dial back from its general presence in Europe, that it would play no part in the long-term support of Ukraine, and it would also veto any NATO involvement. And again, President Putin must be delighted from this perspective. So the first message is to say, look, what's happening in Ukraine won't stay in Ukraine if Putin gets his way. It will spread further across Europe. And secondly, America backing away from its security interests in Europe will have a long-term consequence on the United States. What we need to see is us able to contain what Russia is doing, and therefore be able to then help America with this wider geopolitical challenge of the rise of China. But if we're subsumed, if we're distracted by Russia, that's going to continue its advance, as Putin is now the most powerful leader in Europe, then that means we will not be able to support the United States in any way. And if the European economy, of course, starts to go down, that itself will have a knock-on impact on the American economy too. So there's this wider geopolitical picture of Trump, America, recognizing that we work best when we work together, given the challenges that are coming over the hill.
And given the relationship that the UK has got with the United States, I mean, do you think we're hearing the right kind of language and the kind of straight talking that perhaps is needed from the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer?
Yes, that's always been the case. This special relationship that's spoken of is about us being able to whisper, in the ears of those in the White House to say, let's try this instead of that. Why don't you pursue this angle, not that? And we've been very, very good at it. But with this president, who's very much all about fortress America, I want to say America, make America great again, but actually to build America up at the cost of anybody else, including Europe. And that was the message I got attending the Munich Security Conference, was that America's relationship with Europe is now very much more contractual. It's gone are the historical bonds of friendships and as an ally, but more simply as a mutual convenience. If it benefits America, they'll pursue it. If not, then they will withdraw. And like I say, and as your question implies, we need to try and advance that conversation to persuade Donald Trump that actually the depth of the relationship is absolutely critical, given the complexities, the challenges that our world now faces as our global order starts to deteriorate increasingly in the following years.
Yeah, just picking up on what you were saying there about what was said at Munich, and I'm just wanted to ask you on the spur of the moment, what went through your mind, just in a couple of words, if you will, when you heard J.D. Vance's speech there?
Well, one bit really puzzled me because I represented Bournemouth for 20 years, and the abortion clinic that he mentioned is in my patch. And this was to do with an individual that based himself outside the abortion clinic for an hour and a half. The police begged him to ask him to move on because there was already a dispersion order because of problems around the clinic. He refused to go. And yet, how did that incident end up being mentioned by the vice president of the United States at the Munich Security Conference, when everybody in the audience was wanting to hear where America would go with Gaza, what America would do with Syria, what America is going to do with Ukraine? Instead, we had this grand tour of complaining about lack of openness and transparency, lack of sharing of information and freedoms and so forth. It was a bizarre statement, not the way you go around, winning friends and gaining influence.
So is bizarre the word you would use to characterize that speech?
Yes, completely. But as I say, they're used to saying things, and we've come to terms with the fact that Donald Trump does do things differently, and that's his style. But ultimately, you then need the people behind the scenes to pick these up. We need a peace deal in Europe, but that doesn't give away terrain to Ukraine to allow Putin to rearm, regroup, and do it all over again. Otherwise, there is a 1938 to the world now. The other word that went around, or the feeling at Munich, was appeasement. absolutely, that we were doing a deal with the bully. The bully was able to walk away, able to claim a form of victory. And as I say, it won't stop in Ukraine. And it will be even better for Putin simply because America has then backed away, retreated from its interests in Europe. So Europe is now a very much more unstable, uncertain place to be right now.
Yeah, and you say Europe is on its own in your tweet. I just want to put something else to you. Boris Johnson, of course, well known on the international stage as being something of a Trump whisperer, and we understand that they have a good rapport, the two men. Boris Johnson says that President Trump's comments aren't supposed to be taken at face value. Rather, he says, they're there to shock Europeans into action. Is that technique working? And do you agree with Boris Johnson's assessment?
I don't agree with that style. The message was clear, and I've actually been confirming what Donald Trump has said. Every single NATO country, particularly in the west of Europe, needs to spend more on defense. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less. And Donald Trump has said that, annoyed, frustrated that America has picked up so much of the bill. But to get us to do that, there are various ways. And what they're achieving now is to say, I don't even care how much you spend in more because I'm out of here. I'm backing away. And that thing in Ukraine, I'm quite content to allow Putin to claim a form of victory, to actually, and prevent even NATO from providing security for the very country that we've been trying to support for the last 3 years. So this isn't just about trying to dissect and understand the curiosities of what Donald Trump says. These are dangerous policies that are forming right now. And we're only in the first couple of months of this presidency. Where does this all go? I'm afraid we're seeing bigger picture is a fragmentation of our world order. And at the same time, Russia, China, and Iran are actually advancing a rival, an alternative vision as to where our world should go. And many nations across the world, particularly in the global south and in the Middle East too, are choosing to lean to the east instead of to the west. And that's a very dangerous place to be indeed for all of us.
All right. Well, thank you for your analysis. We really appreciate your time. Tobias Ellwood, former UK Defence Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And finally, Pope Francis has been diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs. The 88-year-old pontiff was admitted to hospital on Friday, where he underwent a CT scan and a chest X-ray. Well, his condition has been described as complex, and he remains closely monitored at a Rome hospital. Well, doctors have prescribed additional medication to aid his recovery. Well, despite his health challenges, Pope Francis has expressed gratitude to well-wishers and asked for prayers. Well, Christians around the world are uniting in hope for his swift recovery. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hi Scott, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. So we're here at the Festival of Golf. As you can hear, it's all lively in the background. The Live season opener in Riyadh. What are your expectations for this weekend?
Well, first starts with fun and probably ends with families. And so having our first round last night, which was so exciting, it is my first Live event. And just to walk the course and see people smiling, you might hear the music in the background. We have music playing, we have DJs in our neon forest. And we have a fan zone that's to the likes I've never seen before. And the Backstreet Boys are playing tonight. So, I mean, when are you going to come to a golf tournament? See the greatest stars in the world. You got DJ, you got Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Waco Neiman, I mean, it is a who's who of golf and pretty fun.
There's something for everyone, as you said, at the Backstreet Boys. I know a lot of the non-golf fans who are here are looking forward to that as well. There's also another first here. The tournament is being played under lights. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, you know, we have an incredible leader in His Excellency, Yasser Rahman, and he thought, hey, what an incredible opportunity to play at night. It'd be the first time it's ever been done before. We're in Riyadh, which is wonderful for television back in the US. You might know we have a new deal with Fox, so it puts the broadcast times in the right zone. It gives the players kind of an opportunity to test and try something new. And we have stars in this league that want to do something different. And I think it gives us an opportunity to showcase innovation, do something new and fun, and hit some broadcast windows in the US that are helpful.
Of course, absolutely, and we'll get to that point on Fox in a moment. So here it is, it's growing as a golf hub. What is the main driver behind that? Obviously, Liv is hugely involved in this. Where do you see the game growing over the next 5 years?
Well, there are so many incredible golf projects in the kingdom. I mean, you have Darija Gate, the project Greg Norman designed. You have what's happening in Qadiyah with those two beautiful courses down there. And it was just with a gentleman from Neom, which seems like that's going to be incredible too. So first off, it starts with the quality of golf courses. You clearly have commitment in this market. They continue to showcase, as we have here, a spectacular golf course and continuing the fandom to build. And I think that momentum is really going to help us for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. What are your favorite aspects of the Liv model? Obviously, like we've got the music here behind, the team aspect. Why do you think that is growing at such a fast rate in comparison with the PGA? Average age of the fans in the PGA is in the 60s. The average age of Liv fans is now in the 30s. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite aspect is the team aspect. I was with Sergio Garcia yesterday having lunch, and he was talking about how passionate he was about helping his guys, Luis and Puig and Abraham, kind of emerge and develop. I mean, and that to me is the specialness of this model. You have the greats of the game with an opportunity to kind of carry forward this next generation and help them emerge, not only as professionals and elite golfers, but also as human beings. And I think that's what brings me the most joy.
And kind of speaking about the human being aspect, I was lucky enough to walk the course behind Bryson DeChambeau last night, at Cameron Smith, at Dustin Johnson. These guys are just incredible.
You can't believe how athletic they are, right?
Yeah.
Like Bryson's drives, DJ's raw athleticism, and Cam's short game, you actually got to see it all. Like, that is the best of the best on display.
Yes, and that is why, so like in terms of viewership, obviously you're competing against the PGA. As you mentioned earlier, you've just signed the deal with Fox as well as ITV in the UK.
It's a wonderful deal.
You're really starting to compete now for viewership with the PGA. This must be very exciting.
Yeah, I prefer like kind of co-opetition. I mean, I think all of us in the golf ecosystem, a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't think we're getting anywhere near scratching the surface in terms of the opportunity we have to drive more fans, golfers and non-golfers alike, into this golf family. Our household viewership opportunity in the 100 countries where we're broadcast is almost 800 million homes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so we have such opportunity ahead and such good momentum so far. And I'm rooting for the PGA Tour to do really well. I'm rooting for the DP Tour to do really well. And Liv is what I'm really passionate about.
And you yourself have had an incredible career, obviously, in the States. You've managed some of the biggest sports franchises in the world. What fundamentals from managing those are you going to bring into Liv to help further the game for Liv?
Well, the fundamentals are very similar. If you look at the business model here, it's TV. And so we've made some good progress as of late. We have a ways to go, but incredible progress with Fox and ITV, among others around the world. Our sponsorship base, if you don't have to look too far, then over my right shoulder to see Madden come in as one of the top. It's one of the 6 largest mining company in the world with a world-class CEO. Riyadh Air, Roshan, and our good friends in Bahri. So we have a great sponsorship base, and that's going to have to continue to grow around the world. But we've had such incredible support from the region here, which has been great. And then, look, we need more people coming. We need more people watching, reading, wearing our merchandise. Get this vest at a store near you. And and experiencing this incredible hospitality. So I would just encourage you to give it a try. If you have a chance to come out and see a live event, it is probably like no event you've ever been to in your life. It is fun, it's engaging, it's family friendly, and you get to see more stars than you see in any constellation in the sky.
Agreed about that. It was incredible last night. So you have come in to live at somewhat of an interesting time. Obviously, there's a lot of talk of allegiances with the PGA as well as the DP World Tour. Are you the man to achieve that goal? Is that something you want?
This is it never has been, never will be, it never could be about any one person. This is led by our incredible chairman. We have an incredible staff. And we have a golf industry that, as they say, inshallah, is actually pulling together and wanting to do what's best for the game of golf, to grow the game of golf, to come together and to make sure that everywhere around the world, golf fans are satisfied with what they're getting in terms of coverage and access to events.
President Donald Trump has recently met with the PGA Commissioner as well as Adam Scott, who also works for the PGA. To discuss a potential merger. There has been a lot of talk about this. Donald Trump has said on his campaign trail that in 15 minutes and one phone call, he could get a deal done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that if the leader of the free world is spending his time on golf, I am very happy. This game matters. It's one of the great life teachers in the world. It gives values that this world needs more of right now. It brings us together with connectivity. It gets us outside. It gets our phones in our pockets. It teaches us integrity and resilience and consistency, all things we all need to be successful in this world. And if there's commitment for all sides to bring the game together, which is good for the game of golf, I couldn't be happier.
Have you spoken with Trump?
I have not.
Okay.
But we are playing at his golf course in Miami in a few weeks. So you know.
And he is a fantastic golfer, obviously, with kind of break 50 with Bryson, who's obviously doing huge numbers online. That's been incredible to watch. Yeah. Another point, the US Championship announced on Wednesday that it will accept players from LIV. This is a huge coup, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's a coup. The RNA announced this similarly today. So for the Open Championship, we'll see the same in Northern Ireland this year. So very exciting. For us, is, you know, when you look at, when you consider the majors, the biggest stage in the world for the biggest stars in the world, and that's obviously the Masters at Augusta and the PGA of America, PGA Championships, and then the US Open and the Open Championships. They want the best stars in the world, and we have quite a few of them. And so I think when there's an opportunity to put those two things together, good things will happen. And we're really pleased and grateful and appreciative of this, you know, the olive branch and the step forward. We've got great leaderships in the organizations that matter, and we're thrilled to be a part of it.
I'll just end on quickly. Do you have a favorite golfer who plays elsewhere that you would like to see in LIV?
No. I have one favorite golfer. That's my father-in-law. I have to love him for something.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to seeing him on the course soon.
Okay, good. You will soon.
Thanks so much, Scott. A pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, Cam. Thanks so much for your time.
No worries.
So we're at the beautiful Riyadh Golf Club here for the first LIV opener of the season. What are we expecting?
Well, it's going to be different this time around. We were here back in December for the International, and that was a great event. We're playing it under lights this time. I think it might be a little bit tougher just because the ball's not travelling as far. It's a little bit colder at night. And then just kind of the depth perception, I think, at night is a little bit different as well. So it'll be an interesting week, one that I'm looking forward to. And, you know, every time this time of year comes around, the first event of the season, everyone's hyped up and ready to go. So we can't wait to get started.
And even going back to your point, obviously, it's been played at night, it's been played under lights, even for the judging of the greens, and even as an amateur golfer who's not that good, I mean, it must play a huge part, even for lies as well, and especially on the greens. How are you preparing for that?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the longer stuff is, you know, pretty much the same. I think when you get around the greens, the bunkers, the rough, if the ball sits down a little bit, all becomes a little bit, it's just not what we're used to, just a little bit harder to judge. The green slopes, I think the pace of putting will be very difficult this week. yeah, so all stuff that we're trying to get prepared for, but is all very different.
And so being here in Riyadh as well, this has had a huge effect on the popularity of golf here. How is it in your perception?
Yeah, I think, you know, I've come to Saudi now for 3 or 4 years, and every time I've come here to an event, there's been more and more people, and I think that's a great thing. You know, that's what we're trying to do out here.
The next event is in Adelaide. It's on your home turf. How excited are you for that? I know it was a ripper last year, as you'd say.
Yeah, no, obviously can't wait to get back home. It's always nice. You know, I think having the home ground advantage there is nice as well. You know, it's what we grew up on, and really what we're used to, and what we, you know, fell in love with the game for. So can't wait to get back there. It's always a great time. It's a great tournament. I'm very biased. It's my favourite tournament I think I've ever played, but it's always exciting to get back down to Adelaide and bring world-class golf down there.
Absolutely. So in order to go back to your point on the love of the game, we've heard Rory McIlroy say, obviously, there's 39 events on the PGA. Mm-hmm. Here it's 14. They've said they're a bit overburdened, overworked. Do you feel the schedule is better with Liv?
I do enjoy having an off-season. You know, going down to Australia is something that I've kind of missed throughout the years. Being able to play a few more events down there, you know, bring back golf to Australia and try and make it more popular and better for the future. So there are definitely some benefits to having an off season. You know, kind of doing what you want and spending more time at home is never a bad thing.
And better for the future, as you say. You've got the Cam Smith scholarship system. Mm-hmm. As well. So that must fill you with great pride to bring obviously 2 players every year over to Florida.
Yeah.
How much are you enjoying that?
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's something that I do really enjoy, and I think, you know, as much as the kids learn off me, I feel like I learn off them. It's always nice to, you know, just have a fresh mindset on things. You know, the kids play with such freedom, and you know, we were able to bring them to Chicago last year, and they had a great time around the team, and even hitting balls and doing putting on the greens and stuff. They loved it, so it does bring me a lot of joy.
So Tom McGibbon, obviously, as you spoke about young players, he's only 22. He's joined Liv. Rory McIlroy said, bit of a mistake, he was saying, at this age to be joining Liv at such a young age. What's your take on that?
I mean, again, I'm biased. I think it's great out here. I think it'll be great for him to develop his game around, you know, he's on John Rahm's team. He'll spend a lot of time around him, seeing what he does, and obviously being such a great player and spending time around other guys as well. I think it's very different out here with the team environment. You know, you maybe get some tricks of the trade off John and the rest of the team, and you know, hopefully it makes him a better player. And I think this is a great spot for him to be.
And in terms of being a better player, we've seen you had some great results at the Masters. With that coming up, is there a green jacket coming your way?
I mean, I hope so. It's been one that's been very close to me a lot of times. I feel like I've done a lot of work this off season and in Australia to kind of prepare myself for the event. So hopefully I did all the right things and it can work out this year.
Absolutely. We've heard as well in the media that you and your wife are expecting your first child. Would you like your child to get into the professional golf world?
Geez, it's so hard to say so early, but I mean, it'll definitely spend a lot of time around the game. You know, hopefully it falls in love with the game the way I did as a kid. You know, I always look back on what my parents did for me as a kid and just going out there and enjoying the game. So maybe it'll be a little bit different being around some kind of high stress scenarios, but absolutely, I think it's the best game in the world, and you know, maybe not even professional golf, but just being able to go out and have a hit with your mates and you know, spend some time. It's unlike anything else. So
just to finish, I've got an Australian producer who said I have to ask this: are you Ford or are you Holden?
Oh, geez, that's a great question. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. I was going to say like league or union or league or AFL or something, but I was brought up in a Holden family, so I'm a Holden fan through and through, and I love cars, so I've had a couple of Holdens in my time, and yeah, always Holden.
You heard it here first. Cam, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hi there, Sergio. Thanks so much for your time. It's a pleasure to have you. So what can we expect here from your golf this week?
Well, we're super excited about it here at Riyadh for the first time with Live Golf for the league and playing at night. So it's going to be something new, something very, very exciting for not only us, the players, but I think the people watching, all our fans and everything. And you know, we're looking forward to it. So it's something that it's never been done before in a full tournament, and you know, it should be a great experience.
How does the prep change in terms of reading greens and the lines? How long have you been practicing under lights now in preparation for this?
Well, we've been here a couple of days practicing a little bit. It is a little bit different because the light is different. It's different than the sunlight, obviously, that we're used to playing in. But you know, at the end of the day, it's the same for everyone. So everybody's got to figure out their own way and see who gets it right the most. And you know, but I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is it's going to be something new, something exciting, and that's what we're always trying to do. You know, bring new and exciting things to the game of golf.
And speaking of getting it right, it was you and your team who got it right in Spain last year. How special was that, winning on home soil?
It was super special to be able to win in Spain for us, being mostly a Spanish team. It was super special, and to be able to it was our fourth win as a team, but to be able to make it my first win as an individual, it was, you know, the cherry on top. So you know, it was a great week, and we're super excited to come back and defend our titles there.
And speaking of Spain, obviously a country with huge sporting prowess, especially in football. Obviously Saudi have just been awarded the 2034 World Cup. How excited are you for that?
Yeah, it's always exciting. I think that at the end of the day, the most important thing is to expand all the games, all the beautiful games we have in the world, and expanding everywhere in the world. And you know, obviously we saw Qatar getting it a few years ago, and now Saudi is getting it for the future. So I think it's great. It shows, you know, how all sports are growing everywhere. And you know, I know that everyone here in Saudi are super excited about the possibilities that they're going to have, and you know, you can see their league is growing, and you know, they're obviously investing and doing a good job at that.
And you've been invited to the PGA Championship this year, the first time you've played in that since 2022. Obviously, it's been a little bit difficult for the LIV players. Do you imagine going forward it's going to get easier?
I hope so. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I'm super thankful that because of the way I played last year, I got invited back to the PGA Championship. It's one of my favorite majors, and I'm super excited about going back, without a doubt. I think that at the end of the day, I think what, you know, in my personal opinion, what the majors want is the best players there, and obviously we have a lot of those great players that deserve to be in a lot of those majors. The only thing we can do is kind of keep playing well, keep representing our game the best way possible, and then you know, the majors will make the decisions in who they want playing in them.
So you have the most points in Ryder Cup history. You have recently paid your fines to DP World. You hope to be selected. How important is that for you this year?
Yeah, I love the Ryder Cup. Everyone knows that. It's my favorite event of the year of in golf, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think that you know, we're members of the European Tour again, of the DP World Tour. That was the first criteria to be able to be eligible to be a part of the Ryder Cup, and now it's going to depend on how I play throughout the year, and hopefully, you know, with the amount of tournaments that I'm going to play, hopefully if I play really, really well, I can make it on my own. If not, then obviously I will depend on a pick from the captain, from Luke Donald. But we'll see. The only thing I can do is play the best golf that I can play, and then see where that kind of puts me.
And this is the first time in the Ryder Cup history that players from the US are going to be paid to represent their country. Do you think players should be paid in order to represent their country?
Look, I think at the end of the day, for me, as a European, we've never thought about that. We never even, not even mentioned it, but we never even thought about it. So I've never been on that, on that side of the spectrum, I guess, and it's something that I don't think about it. What I want to do is be a part of the Ryder Cup, and that to me it's honor enough to that. Nothing else matters. So that's the way I see it. And
obviously, being an Irishman, I have to ask, it's being held in Ireland in 2 years at the magnificent Adair Manor Hotel. You very much see yourself playing in that, opposed to being the captain.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be playing still. Obviously, there were some talks about maybe the possibility of me being the captain there, but obviously my focus as of now is on playing and hopefully making a few more Ryder Cups if my game is good enough. And when that doesn't happen, then we can try to focus on other things. But I don't want to think about that until I know that I'm not good enough to be a part of it.
And at a day when you're not good enough, I can't imagine that being anytime soon. What are your plans after golf?
Well, I mean, we're still obviously here with the firewalls and everything. I have a stake on the team, so obviously I will be very involved in that, trying to make the team grow as much as possible when I'm not playing. Then I've started doing golf course design. So there's several things, and then we do a lot of great work, my wife and I, with our charities in the US, in Austin, and trying to help as many people as we can that need it. And so there's plenty of things that we can do, not only financially or as a business, but also on helping people.
We look forward to it. Thanks so much, Sergio.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Ian Poulter, the first thing I'd like to ask you, this is going to be played under lights. The first time a tournament has ever been played under lights. How has your preparation been for that in terms of, obviously, you've got the lies, you've got the greens. How's that prep been?
It's been good. It's been, for me, half man, half mattress. I like to lay in. So obviously teeing off at 6 p.m. Is going to be very different. But from a golf playability perspective, it's new, it's innovative. Like when you see it as it is now, it looks very different at night. So it's going to be a good test for us all, I think, to be able to, really kind of pick your lines off the tee visually. It looks a little different at night to what it does in the day. So get your homework done over these few days to be able to select, exactly where you want to hit it. And it's a challenge, but it's a great challenge. The lights, obviously very different. Standing there, you'll have the odd shadow, kind of, which you have to get used to when you're setting up over the ball. But I think it's brilliant. I mean, I think for us to, showcase live golf and do it in a slightly different way and make it a bit more fun, you'll see that over the coverage. It'll be awesome.
And speaking about live golf, obviously, the live opener is here in Riyadh for the first time. Everyone's talking about it. How excited are you?
I'm very excited. I think all of us, we've played obviously before Royal Greens, but for us to come to Riyadh, I think is special. Live Golf themselves, concerts on all throughout the weekend, which is fantastic. And, it's great to be able to get a little bit more culture here, to see the city and, take it all in.
It's well documented your fashion sense on the course. Are you planning any glow in the dark?
Well, no glow in the dark. Castor, our new sponsor, we're pretty proud to obviously launch that this week. It'll be the first time, out in the new gear this week. So, yeah, I feel, even though it's not quite bright colours, but it looks great. We're very, very happy with our new clothing sponsor.
So, as competitive as golf is now. We're obviously going into a Ryder Cup here. You're known as Mr. Ryder Cup. Do you ever see yourself coming back into the fray? Obviously, there's talk of Donald Trump. He said in one phone call in 15 minutes he would get a merger done. I know it's not going to be a merger. It's going to be an investment from LIV into the PGA. Is that ever possible? I know a lot of fans that'd love to see you back.
Look, never say never, right? As it stands today, that isn't an option for me. But look, things change quite quickly, like we've seen, in the golf landscape. So let's see how things play out. You never know.
Michael Jordan has said the one thing he's afraid of on a golf course is Ian Poulter. What are you afraid of on a golf course?
What am I afraid of? Well, I've never played against Michael, so I wouldn't know if I have to be afraid with him on the course, but maybe one day I'll get that opportunity to take him on. That would be quite fun. But no, there's nothing really that I'm afraid of. I don't like snakes. I don't like, those animals with no shoulders. That's about the only thing I'm afraid of.
You heard it here first. It's from Michael Jordan. The challenge has been set. So that would break a lot of numbers on social media. Obviously, we've seen Bryson DeChambeau has done amazing things on YouTube with his Break 50 series.
Yep.
Do you have any plans to engage the world of social media in your own way going forward?
Yeah, I think in the not too distant future, you might see a digital channel coming out. So you'll have to wait and see.
Ian Poulter, thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Hi, Henrik. Thanks so much for your time. So, how has the prep been? Obviously, this is the first tournament that's ever going to be played under lights. How has your prep been?
I think coming over from the US, I've tried to stay a bit more on a different time zone. We're going to be playing late at night, so staying in my US time zone schedule is making it a little bit easier. I've played every practice round has been played under the lights. Haven't had a lot of experience prior to this week, so we made the most of it. Played Monday night, Tuesday night, playing again tonight. So we should be accustomed with the with kind of the slight challenges on the odd thing, with the shadows and so on. We sometimes get it playing late in the afternoon as well. You can have sunset and so on, and how you see certain undulations on the greens and so on. But in the bigger picture, it's been fine. I think it's going to showcase really well on TV. I haven't seen any footage from the event so far, but I can imagine it's going to look really cool, and it is a different experience. And I think the people that come out here and everyone watching is going to get a different feel for it.
And how about in the off season in terms of normal practice? Do you tend to play once a week? Do you not want to see a set of golf clubs at all? Are you still honing your skills in the off season?
Yeah, I've certainly been playing more in daylight in the off season. We've had a long off season, which is something I really enjoy with my current setup. I've been traveling the world for many years, and you feel like 1 year has kind of tagged into the next one and so on. And to really have that time to first decompress a little bit, put the clubs away, and then you have time to start up and do both proper gym work and get ready physically and feel rested mentally. So when you're taking on a new season, you feel like you're ready to go. And I've had my team over in Orlando. We've practiced, and I've always been a player that tends to practice more than I play. But with my son, almost 15 years old, he likes to play quite a lot. So I think in the last couple of years, I've tend to switch over a little bit and do a bit more practice playing than maybe I used to back in the day.
Well, it's probably good for him and it's good for you. Would you like your son to follow in his father's footsteps and be a professional golfer?
Yeah, we'll see if he can make that happen. I think he's got his sights set on college. He's still got a few years before that, but he wants to play college golf, and he's turning into quite a nice little golfer himself. So we'll see if he can make it all the way out on the tours.
So speaking of players that have had obviously their main goals, Rory McIlroy has always wanted to win the Masters. Do you think he's there yet? Do you think we're ever going to see that?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, Rory is obviously a phenomenal player, done so many great things in the game. I know he's got one of the majors left to go for a Grand Slam, the same as Jordan Spieth got one as well. So that's obviously what the natural target for both of those players. So I'm never going to say that someone can't do anything, and you know, that's obviously a quest of his. And come April, I guess we'll see.
There was one quote from Rory. He said that Tom McKibben, obviously he's just joined Liv from the PGA. He's only 22 years old. Rory said that may be a bit of a misstep at his age. What are your thoughts on that?
I think everyone's going to make the decision they feel is the best for themselves and their careers. And you know, I'm not one to tell anyone if they should walk left, right, or centre. So yeah, I mean, each one to their own. And obviously, I saw him the other day and wished him welcome here to Liv, and yeah, another young, exciting player to follow and watch. And of course, I'm going to try and beat him when I have the opportunity.
Of course. And then to just finish on, so there's always talk amongst, well, especially in interviews, who would you have at a dinner party? Your 4 favourite guests. Who would you have as your guest on a 4-ball on the golf course?
On the golf course? Well, I don't want to disappoint my son, so I guess he's going to have a spot in there, and then I'll take some of the all-time greats. I'll take Jack Nicklaus and Ben Hogan.
Great, a very good choice. The very best of luck this weekend, Henrik.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,